Okay, we're live. Arthur, thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
So we connected at a little outdoor social gathering, and we chatted like all night. I didn't talk to any of my other friends. Some of my friends, apparently one of my friends actually tried to say bye to me and was like massaging my shoulders for 5 minutes, and then gave up and walked away and just left without saying bye to me.
Yeah, we were definitely on the engrossed side in that conversation.
Yeah. And background-wise, your name's, or why don't you say your name?
Arthur Naugle. I've been, background-wise, I've been a guy that's jumped around from a large number of fields and expertise. Currently I work in programming.
Okay.
But before that I've worked in sales, I worked in service, I've worked in finance. I worked finance for years, running a financial company. I was planning on running my own business for a long time, but then looking at the logistics on that became daunting, and then I found a job that I really liked, so that kind of just ended up going into that path.
Yeah. I think in general it's always nice to be on the employed path, and then you can always do a side thing, and then if that takes off, then you can transition,
Yeah, and that's kind of what I've been thinking on more, and these days I've been more playing the game of, traditional capitalism, looking at buying another property, going through and learning more on the stock market, getting better at investing, how to gain the system any way you can, really.
Yeah. It really is a system, is what it best describe it. And you definitely hear sometimes younger folks, complain about, especially when you're younger, where you have no skin in the game yet. You'll complain about the system or say how it should be totally torn down or whatever. But at some point, I feel like as you get older, once you have skin in the game, it's like, well, this is the system. What can I do to do the best I can in this current system?
Sure. I mean, it's funny because nowadays, more so than ever before, since there's so many more people just kind of getting in and trying to get into it, like more younger people, they're like, yeah, they want to get into real estate. Real estate and the stock market are a large driving force these days, and it's become much more accessible than it used to be.
Yeah.
Though, every time that happens, there's consequences to it. And that's always the interesting thing that people don't really look at a lot. And that's, the classic problem I run into is that people rarely see, what happens when people start moving into this game that the big players have been playing forever.
Right.
We end up with the stock market boom, the boom and crash in '08, where it's like the market's huge, everybody's playing, goes down. Well, when it goes down, most of the time, the big players see the writing on the wall, they pull out, market collapses.
Right.
And it's like, they knew if you could have let it run its course and they would have been stuck in it too, but they have enough skin that they go, cool, I'm going to take my 40% of the game and go home.
Right. Yeah, it is a little bit scary when you start to hear everyone and the phrase like everyone and their grandma, but really, most grandmas are probably invested in the stock market. So like everyone and like their younger 12-year-old nephew are invested in the stock market right now, which is a little terrifying, but it's also like, maybe that's good, but not good if they're only investing in GameStop, or something like that.
Sure. Being able to go through and affect change, like GameStop was a great example of people going through and going, oh, you did something really dumb. We're going to punish you really badly for that.
Sure.
And, that was the nice thing to see about GameStop, is it was something that, personally, I'm not touching with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
I don't have the money to lose.
I didn't touch it either.
Funny enough, I also, at the beginning of coronavirus, when the market collapsed, I got freaked out and ended up burning really badly over that.
Oh,
so
okay.
my market, I got crushed on it, and I've been having to rebuild my portfolio. So that one went real bad for me, and I lost like 90% out of it, which was, well, technically I lost 70%, learned about options, gambled my 30% back into 100%, then gambled it all away down to 10% and got out of the market.
Oh, okay. So you dug yourself into a hole, got out of the hole, but then fell back in the hole.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, that's how gambling works.
That's options, yeah.
It's like, it's gambling. I'm like, should gambling be legal and encouraged and built into the stock market? I'm like, probably not. Just as a general rule, you're like, no, I'm going to bet you that this is going to go up. I'm like, don't we have laws against, betting someone that it's going to go up or go down? Like, how is this excluded from that? Because that's literally what you're doing, is betting that it's going to go up or go down.
Right. Yeah, it's true. I mean, there is the argument, it's the inherent value of holding the contract, and that's like but really you decide on a strike price, and now you're betting that that'll either be above that or below that, depending.
And there's the inherent value of when your bookie gives you the money that you won. There's
That's
an
true.
inherent value
That's true.
there.
That's true.
You own that money that they gave you, and if they gave you a piece of paper saying if it wins, I will pay you, then there's an inherent value in that paper, because once that strike price expires, it's worthless.
Right.
So how is it any different than the bookie slip?
Right.
It's the same thing. It's just legalized gambling, but it's not. It was just legalized gambling for the rich.
Right. Do you happen to know when options was created? I feel like it's relatively new relative to just stocks.
That one I do not know.
Yeah.
I know the stock game started in the 1400s. That
early?
Yeah.
Oh,
Real
wow.
capitalism, that's where you want to see, like, where does capitalism start? And it's hard to pick a date because you have the merchant system and then you have monarchs. But it's like, where did really capitalism start? I'm like, let's go with the London stock market. 1400, there's a date for you. Let's see how that plays. And that's but most people don't realize it's that old. They think this is, a newer system, that a lot of people think it's an American thing. Like, America created capitalism and it's the drive that's saved the world. And,
Sure.
That viewpoint. Because that's, the stock market is one of the most purest form of capitalism there is. It's literally
chaos.
It's chaos and people trying to get money for nothing.
Yeah.
Which is.
That's always been a funny thought too, like that you get money for nothing. But you don't really. You are getting... As a kid, I was like, this is getting money for nothing. This seems insane. And now as I'm older, maybe I'm just like drank the Kool-Aid because I see the green percentages and I'm like, yeah, it's because I made a smart choice and I'm investing in the company of the future and I'm helping support that and helping that grow with my money. And that's why I'm being paid in dividend, or in appreciation of stock price.
Sure.
But definitely the day-to-day volatility, the trading, that seems like that's not necessarily production being created, but really it's just transferring of wealth because someone made a bad bet. So they lost some and then you win some. And
well, the argument against that thinking is that of every company that goes public, most of them the average lifespan of any company that goes public is 7 years.
Sure, right.
So they go public, and within 7 years, on average, you got to know a number of them have to die out before that to give us an average. So you go through, you're like, I'm going to invest in this company that I think has a good product. It doesn't take off, and your money goes nowhere.
It's true.
That can happen, or you're like, I made a smart decision and bet on black. Because most people, they don't know they're not looking at the breakdown of what the profit and loss structure is of these companies.
Right.
They look at a news story they read once, or one other person that said
told them about it. Yeah, it's true.
And there was so much false information in the stock market, they had to make laws against it.
That's right. And even then, there's still, hit pieces that are obviously paid by certain sectors or certain companies,
or congressmen,
right,
who are just exempt for all of those rules. They get to do whatever they want when it comes to the stock market, basically, which is hilarious.
Wait, is that true? Congressmen are exempt? In what way?
From most of the traditional insider trading laws do not apply to them because they're not an insider of the company. They are in Congress.
Okay.
So if they get inside information, it is very hard to prove that they committed a crime for insider trading, as in the case of I think 4 congressmen or 4 senators that sold all of their stocks before the market crashed and rebought in.
Oh, for COVID?
For COVID.
Oh, they knew that there was going to be some sort of lockdown kick in.
They got the info before anyone else did, before it went public.
Wow.
And it was totally fine.
Wow, they're exempt from that, huh?
Yep.
I did read about, this was back in January, I want to say, it was Nancy Pelosi's husband opened a bunch of 2023 Tesla call options for, and maybe some end phase, I'm not sure, but obviously with the idea of like, okay, there's going to be some infrastructure bill that's going to support, electrification of the fleet and nation or whatever. So,
sure.
But a lot of people maybe weren't like, that's not necessarily insider. It's like everyone kind of knew that's going to be coming anyways. You know?
that one's a harder call because it's kind of gray. Most people have seen Tesla's been doing well for, the company's growing.
Right.
We've been seeing a push from the Democrats in general that way, and also it was from.
And Biden's elected at that point. He was already in office. Oh, he wasn't in office yet, but
he was already. But that was coming. Now, see, the funny thing is I would see it much more suspect from a Republican standpoint. Someone that's been fighting against this all of a sudden starts investing in it.
Sure.
Now I'm like, wait a minute, your money and your mouth don't match up on the story. Then that starts becoming more suspect. But there's an argument of, is that a double standard? I'm like, well, that means right now we know the Democrats are going to vote to try and pass this. We know the Republicans would try and stop it. Well, if they know that they're going to pass it anyway, or that they've changed their mind and decided they want to pass it, now it does become insider because it's not public information.
Right.
But once again, it's Congress, and they don't have to follow any of those rules.
Sure. Right.
So it was actually really funny is AOC.
Yeah.
Has a I think 6-minute video that was her interviewing a number of people on dealing with the Federal Trade Reserve and trade regulations for specifically Congress. And it was one of the most interesting videos because it was something I never thought I would see, which is someone that had the balls to go, yeah, so my colleagues here hypothetically could go through, buy stocks in a company that they knew they were going to go, and then go ahead and write laws to help those companies, and they can totally do that, right?
I recall this video.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was one of those videos that was like, I may disagree with you politically,
sure,
but you have to respect someone that's willing to go, yeah, I'm pretty sure everyone sitting next to me is corrupt.
Right.
Would you agree, as a federal witness, that the people next to me are most likely corrupt? And I'm like, wow, everybody hates her. I'm like, yeah, of course everybody hates her. She called them all corrupt and called them on bullshit that they're blatantly doing.
Yeah, that's hilarious. And just to bring some context here, because I think that you know quite a bit about politics, you know quite a bit about history, and what you mentioned to me was that you have an interest in maybe running for political office one day, right?
And yeah, that's something I definitely want to do. I think I may volunteer next year.
Sure.
To work on a campaign.
Okay, that's smart.
Because that's basically the only chance every guide I've read on how do you get into politics, like go volunteer on somebody's campaign. Wow. Go learn the ropes. Go do a little bit of the legwork, see what's involved with it, see what they use to go through and get people on their side, get people interested. Like, how do you start a campaign from, unfortunately next year will probably all be incumbents, but that at least gives me something, at least, it'll be easier to work on. Or maybe I'll work on one of their opponents just because most of my elected representatives are good, but there's one that I'm unimpressed with, so I might just pick one of anyone running against her and go help them.
Right. And out of curiosity, because I think there's one component of politics, which is like being the face, being the spokesman, the speaker, that type of person. But there's obviously a lot of people behind the scenes that maybe support an AOC that are working behind the scenes. Obviously, AOC doesn't have the time to read through all these laws, so she's got 4, 5, 6, who knows how many staff members that are helping her decipher, and they kind of know her and they know how she would feel about certain things. To be like, okay, hey, we think you're gonna like this, or you're not gonna like this, and kind of be the more technical analysis. What kind of role would you hope to see yourself in?
I mean, when it comes to working on a campaign, I think I'm going to be looking for more of the actual initial stuff, not the actual running side of it. Mm-hmm. I understand enough of that position and some of that I could I feel confident in my ability to go through, and if not start off running at 100%, pick it up quickly enough.
Sure.
I know enough on politics to go, yeah, I get how the bill searchers work. I'm more technically savvy than 99% of the politicians we have. I'm going to have a better grip on that part. So that part of it, of going through, reading bills, looking into that, I'm not overly concerned. My concern is, how do you start?
Sure.
What's step one?
Right.
How do you get one person interested in going, you know what, this guy might be able to make a difference?
Right.
And, that's the hardest part. Like, even when it comes to, if you think about it, like the people that know you best, it's like, heck, even Trump has, one relative that goes, he's the devil. Like, every family's got somebody that's what it stands for. If you can't convince your own family, though, it's like, how are you supposed to convince large numbers of random people?
Sure.
And how do you do it in a way that's actually, has some moral integrity?
Right.
Because that's the lacking thing in politics. And I feel like the problem with politics is, like, look at approval ratings for Congress. No one's happy.
Right.
And Congress these days don't try to fix anything, really. Like, they don't go through and write bills that they try and play bills to their constituencies as opposed to trying to figure out a solution.
Right. Right.
And they try, and now it's getting even more partisan where it's just jamming bills down each other's throats as opposed to going, okay, well, you need this, well, I want this, so let's figure out where can we give and take,
Right.
The voter right bill on both sides right now. We have, Georgia passing some laws that are very restrictive and very, aggressive in their approaches to it under the, arguments of being anti-fraud.
Mm-hmm.
And like out of their most recent bill, they had 2 points that were validly anti-fraud. I don't know if they're necessary or not. That's a solid argument. But the rest of the bill was just trying to reduce voter count.
Right.
And it's like, this is not the way you should do politics. When you can't justify going through and going, yeah, our voting hours should end at 5 o'clock when most people are still at work.
Right. Right.
Because most of our, constituency are unemployed or are retired.
Right.
So, let's close the polls at 3. We'll get just the people
Just
over
the
65
retired, right.
and the rest of the people, they don't count. And it's like that type of action that, it's just voter suppression. It's hard to defend.
Right.
But going through and trying to go through and confirm, having the person having to have an ID if they wanted to vote by mail. I'm kind of okay with that, at least for the initial sign up.
Mm-hmm.
It matters how hard do you make it to do that. If it's something where I can go in to my local post office and go, hey, I need to register by mail, here's my ID. Okay, I can do that. Most people can make it to their local post office. I don't feel that's restrictive to, the person's ability to vote.
Right.
And if you don't have it, you still have the option of voting in person. Like, it's just, you want extra convenience, you have to take a little extra security. And I'm like, that's fine. That is, that's something that works. But then trying to pass bills where they're like, yeah, if you want to go through and vote by mail, it has to be put against a signature a signature verification, which any lawyer will tell you isn't anything. Signature verification isn't even a real field. People's signatures change over time. There's been a number of good studies on it that say, are handwriting analysis even are they a pseudoscience?
Right.
And it's like, we're literally trying to base laws around democracy itself, and you want to try and restrict it based on a pseudoscience or something that's very close to it.
Right.
And on top of that, you're not giving a specialist 5 hours to review a letter versus a letter where it's at least a little bit of an argument. You're looking at one guy with 30 seconds to compare 2 signatures.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this is I get what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is right, but you have to find a way to do it that works and accommodates. Otherwise, it looks like you're just trying to throw out ballots.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why, the media in a lot of cases are like, people are trying to throw out ballots, and then people are like, they're trying to rig the election. It's all these extreme rules because, people aren't willing to figure out what's the best for the American people. They just want to appeal to the people screaming. Right.
Yeah.
But
and just to backtrack a second, one thing I've noticed is that you it seems to me, I don't know if it's just because of my Facebook algorithm, but you've been a lot more active on social media, on engaging in posts and providing political commentary. I even noticed, I think there was a random post from, not like within my social circle, but this would be like a post from like a general politician. Maybe it was like a Gavin Newsom post, or I'm trying to recall which post this was. But something that was like kind of public knowledge, or some person, maybe it was a councilman's post, and you were engaging in there, and just because I'm friends with you, I see the comment populate there. So I'm starting to see you get in there a lot more. Is that partially because you're like, where do I start? Okay, I'm going to start just engaging in these circles as much as I can.
It was a bit.
Okay.
Like, my political leanings when I grew up was always very right.
Okay.
I believed very strongly in states' rights, which to be fair, in most parts I still do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm very pro-gun, still
Sure.
am, always have been. You know, there are consequences to that, but it's just something I have. But I'm not pro-capitalism as nearly as much as I used to be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely not pro-free market capitalism. Now I voted for Trump in 2016 as an example.
Okay.
And I supported him for a while, but it was a hard argument to defend. I love to argue. I had a coworker that liked to argue with me about the news of Trump every day almost. So I had a lot of arguments, and over time it was hard to defend.
Sure.
You know, when you get presented with a fact, and it is a fact, and it is something that he said, you know, like when Trump went, yeah, I think we should take away people's guns without due process, you know, before the courts have had a chance. I'm like, I can't defend that statement.
Right.
You know, the good work he's done in China does not necessarily outweigh his other mistakes. And like the areas where I felt he was doing well, you know, jobs, China, like in both those areas, he did very well, and they really did get progress.
Sure.
And most Democrats won't acknowledge that.
Sure.
And I'm like, look, I want to give the other side of a coin, because I've always liked giving the other side of a coin, just giving somebody another perspective because it's valuable.
Yeah.
But then as I started going along further on understanding Trump, and then the Lafayette Square riots happened, where I saw what I looked at was one of the biggest violations of free speech in America, in American history, which was, you know, armed police using riot gear on protesters that weren't doing anything wrong.
Right.
And I'm like, the argument for the Second Amendment is to protect the First. And if you can look at armed police attacking protesters that have committed no crime and are in a designated spot they're allowed to protest, it's hard to argue anymore.
Right.
And that was basically where I had to go from being, you know, kind of wishy-washy at that point. Like I was pro just because I was sick of politicians. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it wasn't like Hillary was that great of a choice, all things
Sure.
considered. Even to this day, I'm not totally sure I was wrong in that call.
Right.
I might be, it's closer, but my dislike for her is strong. She's been owned by, you know, companies for a long time. So it's
Right.
like, she was not a great choice. He was not a great choice. And I'd rather bet on the unknown of a non-politician.
Yeah, I think a lot of people did that. I think it's disingenuous to say like, oh, all people that voted for Trump are racist or evil or whatever. I think a lot of people saw him as a wild card, saw him as not establishment, and maybe hoped that he would, you know, okay, he's a businessman background, not necessarily a great business track record as a successful businessman, but he's a businessman, not a politician. So let's see how this turns out. And like you said, actually, you know, I personally pretty much hated the guy from the get-go, but and I definitely lean left, but over the course of time of the election, I definitely couldn't deny certain things like you had mentioned, where there were improvements, there were, you know, economies doing well, jobs, and I personally think it's wrong to credit, I think both wrong to credit a Democrat or Republican president really with giving full credit on how like the stock market does to the economy. When Trump's like, oh my gosh, look at the stock market, newest highs. They have some effects on it, but I do think to some degree they don't have a huge sway over how the cycles, right? Because there's debt cycles and there's 10-year corrections and all these things, and sometimes it's a little bit of a land, just kind of how the cards land sometimes, and a president gets in and it's like, oh, there's a recession happening, you know, or oh, it's doing really well, yay me, or whatever, you know.
Sure, I mean, there's a point of that, but there's also a point of the leader of the country piece, and that does stand for the stock market. Where do they have it? Because the stock market is more, since the stock market itself is basically an illusion anyway.
Right.
You know, it's not like you can go, you know, it's not like you even hold physical, stocks anymore. So the perception of confidence in the president, in how well companies are going to do under him, is what people are normally betting on. Not necessarily that the laws he's going to pass are going to help them or not, but a lot of times it's the perceived strength or the perceived culture that's coming in with the president and how well that's going to reflect for business.
Definitely. Yeah, you're definitely right. With the stock market, it's a lot more emotion-based / just like people's general sentiment and prediction and whether or not they feel like things are stable or things are chaotic, and that affects volatility versus actual equality, you know, income or we should say income inequality, which is like kind of a bigger issue that we have now than maybe we've had in the past? Or would you disagree with that statement?
I mean, income inequality now is by far been the biggest, personally, I think it's one of the biggest issues that we're facing now. Because, that's one of the things that's left me more leaning left these days. And it's funny because I'm not left in a lot of social programs necessarily.
Sure.
There are some programs that I'm open to, some I disagree with, some I think need to be reformed or replaced because, the system has been tried and is broken. But when it comes down to it, I get the arguments all the time because I'm sitting there engaging with, I'm doing one of the things that most people don't is I'm engaging with people that have different viewpoints than mine. I spend most of my Facebook posts are not me going through and agreeing with anyone.
Right.
I almost never post on agreement posts because that doesn't help anyone.
Sure.
I will not learn something from it. I won't realize that I was wrong or that I had some information that needed to be corrected because, there's been a lot of times in my history where I thought something, someone went, here's the facts that actually disprove that. And I'm like, wow, okay. I'm mistaken. Let me try that again. Let's go with, okay, let's incorporate that and how does that fit with what I know? And do I have to throw out what I know? Do I have to just adjust what I know?
Right.
And figure it out? I've been looking at...
And I just want to say that's beautiful because I think that's what this country needs is for people to have, discourse with people that they disagree with without getting really upset or angry or, whatever. And, that's something I always strive to do, and I try to surround myself with. Not that I'm intentionally. Oh, I need to find a really conservative friend right now. It's just so it's just. I think it's part of mixing your social circle that happens, and not. I know some people that won't want to be friends with someone because they voted for Trump, let's say, right? And that can be a problem because now we can't. Because as soon as you become friends with someone, there's a level of respect there. And once the respect's there, then you can actually have a conversation and start to dissect these ideas and come to maybe a less one-sided conclusion,
Sure.
Yeah.
And I would agree with you totally. I've already noticed that, number of people that have blocked me on Facebook has grown.
Oh no.
I look at a post and I'm like, okay, there's 3 comments. There's 2 comments.
Oh no.
I can't see that guy.
Oh no. That's happening.
And I'm like,
wow.
But that's...
Why would they do that? Okay.
People don't like when someone goes through and continually just keeps giving you information that goes against the narrative that you're pushing. And he was, in some cases it probably was just him having more of an extreme viewpoint on something.
Sure.
That was one of the biggest things I've learned. It's one of the oldest philosophy things. It's Socrates said it best, which is the only reason I'm smarter than anyone is I know that I know nothing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's these people that when you are 100% certain on whatever you believe, if you are 100% that it's true, you are wrong.
Right.
Because nothing is that...
There's nothing 100% certain.
It's nothing that...
to get philosophical with it.
It is, but it's fair. But that's the problem with our politics is the people are getting much more 100% on things.
Right.
They're going, this is how, this is the right way, or you're wrong because of this. And one of my favorite debates right now was Trump's patriotic history versus the 1619 movement from the left. 1619 was the introduction of slavery. Trump was trying to promote a more favored piece of looking at American history on a patriotic movement, learning of the heroes and that focus. And those are the two sides that are arguing. And I'm like,
wait, what is this about exactly? Is this for history textbooks?
This is history, for history textbooks.
Oh, history education textbooks.
Yes. They're trying to, there's 2 current, this battle is still ongoing. They're still trying to agree on what our history textbooks should teach people.
Oh, because he was trying to erase some of the negative stuff and highlight.
Well, he was trying to focus on, not necessarily erase anything, but more focus on the positive characters, the role model aspects, the things that you can be inspired by.
Sure.
Which is valuable history.
Right.
The left was more trying to go, if you start from 1776, you don't get a picture of American history. You don't see what happened to these people that led them to a revolution. Why did they stand up and throw off the king? You hear one speech from Boston of no taxation without representation.
Right.
But you don't get through to understand the struggles of the 186 years of before that.
Right. Right.
Of the people that landed here with nothing, that had to fight their way through Indians, that started to go through and grow tobacco, dealing with tobacco trades. Most people don't realize that almost all the white people that arrived in America were indentured servants.
Sure.
You showed up and you had to work for a master for 7 years, and then you were a free man. That's how America was founded, and that covered your cost of your travel and your expenses to go through and get on the ship. And a lot of them were not voluntary. Sometimes they were prisoners that were rounded up, and sometimes they were basically shanghaied, where they just woke up on a boat one day and said, "You're going to America now." And it's a fascinating piece of history, but it has more dark mistakes in it. It has more of the where racism came from in America and some of those plays. So it's like, do you want to teach all of the nitty-gritty of American past? Should we be teaching that?
Right.
And the problem with it is they're both wrong. Because one of these is propaganda, and then the other one is propaganda. They're both trying to prove a narrative. They're not trying to tell you history. They're not trying to tell you, going from 1619 and the introduction of slavery is dumb. The country was founded in the American colony of Jamestown was founded in 1608. It's 11 years off. That's not that much history to cover. You started at the where Jamestown was founded. Now you have an argument to stand on that isn't biased. Maybe we should teach American history from the founding of the colony. But instead they're like, no, let's do it from the introduction of racism. Like, okay, you're teaching propaganda now. You're not teaching the whole story. You're not teaching why they decided to do that.
Right.
You're just teaching that they did. You're trying to demonize people that went through a very hard time where life expectancy was less than 5 years.
Right.
And that's the thing about our society these days is it's so much of it has become propaganda.
Right.
People don't look at, when people cry socialism, it's just a cry from 1960s propaganda. Most people don't know what the word means. Or when they think of socialism, they just think of the USSR.
Right.
That's what they think of. And I'm like, that's not what socialism is. No more than saying that imperial America is capitalism. Like, if you go through and you support capitalism, that means you support slavery. I'm like, no, that's obviously not true. There's nuance in both of these arguments.
Right.
But most people don't want to know the facts anymore. They want the propaganda. They either want the hero tale or they want the villains and the blights of history.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, if you teach actual history, you know both of them.
Right.
There were heroes of it. And one of the things that's always the funniest outrage in some of our outrage culture is that our heroes aren't taught as men anymore. They're taught as these magical hero characters. Abraham Lincoln, as an example, was one of the toughest stories to talk about and for me to write about, is because of the fact when you look at him, I used to love to argue against Lincoln.
Right.
I used to love to argue it from a right perspective because he's the one that introduced the draft.
Right.
And Lincoln's draft.
Restricting states' rights and state powers.
Well, I mean,
he set a precedent.
He set a precedent for it, but he went, when the South seceded, he refused to remove troops from their country. He refused to acknowledge that they were a country, that they had a right to do that. Then once the war started going badly, he forced American citizens into the military without their permission, which wasn't a thing. It's not states' rights, that's American individual freedom.
Right.
He implemented the first income tax. And you're like, but you can go through and point out all these things and paint him as a tyrant. He also was the one that said that and earlier in his career, he's like, I would not free a single black man if I would keep the Union together. But the thing is that's an impossible situation that he was in. It was going through and keeping America. Right. He did what he had to end up freeing the blacks because that problem would not be resolved by any other way. It took war and it took lives to do it.
Right.
To get us out, to get it to the point where, because slavery is a very, very efficient thing at making money.
Right.
And the South wouldn't abandon it because that was where their economy was based. And most people are not going to go, yeah, I'm just going to give away all my money.
Right.
Even though what I'm doing is wrong. There's not a lot of drug dealers in the world that just decide to be good people and donate all of their wealth to the world. It's just not.
And the equivalent of today would be if, like, the government said, high-tech companies, you can't use software anymore. You're going to have to do paper and hire people and do accounting and do everything by paper. No more Excel, no more of that. And they would lose it.
Yeah.
they would lose it. But that's what the equivalent was at the time, was that, this was just how the system worked at the time, was that you needed cheap labor, and because there wasn't enough food to go around, as it is, it was kind of like the natural progression. You could probably make an argument that maybe there could have been a society where slavery didn't exist, and there probably were some parts of the world where slavery didn't exist on a smaller scale, but it was prevalent across the whole world.
It was, but it was more so in America.
Right.
America had a larger percentage comparatively to anywhere else. When you look at Spain's things, they're like, yeah, they have points in South America, but they lost those territories because the slaves rebelled.
Much sooner than it happened in the U.S., right?
Well,
and the slaves didn't rebel.
The slaves never rebelled in the U.S. That's normally how slavery ends: is the slaves rebel and overthrow the oppressors.
Right. And then form a new government,
America's weird because we got rid of it without doing that, and that's why while it was a large percentage of the population, and that's why it's different than any other case. Why racism is still claimed to this day is because it was never.
We never had a revolution.
It wasn't as clean. It was a lot of people that ended up very unhappy with the fact they lost the war, and not, now the underlings are now the overlords, and it wasn't that change. It was the underlings are still in a weak spot because they're free, but they didn't do it themselves. They are now relying on handouts from others, and that argument, we did it because it was morally right, not because the slaves were unruly and couldn't, like what's happened in Rome or, even in South America at a similar time. Italians, or not the Italians, the Spanish had problems with South America rebelling.
Right.
And then it was only when they couldn't go through and spend the resources to send troops to South America anymore that eventually they just overthrew the Spanish and became their own country.
Right.
But
now I want to push back on you on a certain thing, which was earlier you mentioned there's no point in mostly you want to get out there and try to engage with those that maybe you want to have an argument or disagree with on, and kind of arrive to some solution, but maybe not. You're not going to bother going around going, yeah, I agree to other things. But if you want to move into politics one day, you do have to win over people by being perceived not totally as just a disagreeable person. Sure. Right? Or else that could be off-putting, I imagine. But you do need to look, just like AOC is like, whoa, she's got the balls to stand up. And you'd probably be like, yeah, I want to have the balls to stand up too. But you still have to, appeal to a certain, the goal is to appeal to everyone.
Yeah.
It's hard to capture everyone without these little one-liners or these little,
even with
things.
The one-liners, no one captures everyone.
Right.
It's just not since Reagan that we had a real landslide in America. It's just not a realistic thing.
Right. Yeah.
Well, the answer to that question is pretty easy, Ron. It's easy to go through and get people that agree with you to agree with you.
I see. So that can come later.
It can come later. Inspiring. The problem that you're going to run into is the people on the fence.
Right.
Well, if I can convince the people that are on the other side to move onto the fence,
sure,
I feel like I'll have a better chance of convincing people that are on the fence to come to my side.
Right.
And I feel like if I want to learn the skills of going through and getting people to agree with me, starting with people that have the exact opposite viewpoint are better people to start with.
Right.
Because, at least I understand their viewpoint. Most people don't want to listen to the other side. They don't want to hear the viewpoint. They want to go, my guy's right and your guy's wrong, and it's that simple. And I'm like, most of the time it's never that simple.
Right.
The biggest problem is rarely that we both don't want the same thing. Most people want what's the best for the American people. Occasionally they're more interested in their own personal self, but I don't feel like that's at least not the vast majority. It might be the majority, but I still think that's still going to be close. But I still think most people, even if they're trying to enrich themselves, are still trying to at the same time help the American people. Even with the corrupt politicians that we have, I still think most of them are trying to do a good job.
Right.
At least for the people they represent. Maybe not for the country as a whole, but at least for the people that got them in power, they're trying to help those people so that they can stay in power.
Right.
That's
right. And you referred to me to that YouTube video by CBP Gray, correct?
Yeah.
Right. The Rules for Rulers, which was a great video. I think I actually watched it twice, and I think from the get-go, all the little interactions and being explained was fantastic. I do think that one of the reasons maybe I lean a little left is because I see that it is almost, as a common citizen, it makes more sense to be a little bit left if you believe, first of all, if you believe the system is somewhat working, and if you also believe that, well, there's already the key power holders that are going to get their cut. It's just the way it works, right? Like you said, they're corrupt, but then they also want to appease their people. And it's your job as a common citizen to at least advocate and make sure we're getting our share too. You know, because if we just are convinced by the key holders, who are obviously going to be advocating for lower corporate taxes and more subsidies for their industry, and if you get sucked into that, oh yeah, that'll help make jobs, I want to support the Koch brothers too, and blah blah blah, and I don't want increased taxes on corporations, and because that would hurt jobs, and I don't want I do want those subsidies for, you know, the oil industry because that'll help jobs, where versus maybe wanting something more specific to help you directly. And obviously this is my own little narrative that, like, if you buy into it, then it's your job to really advocate for getting some services that help you and doesn't help them, because they're already going to get their cut no matter what. And that's kind of my little interpretation from it a little bit, in terms of like, cool, that's why I want to make sure there's a nice park in my neighborhood, you know. Otherwise that will never happen and that money gets pocketed elsewhere, you know.
And there's a good argument on that viewpoint, and that's the more realistic viewpoint, honestly. It's
right.
The, well, take what you can get while you can get it.
Right.
Unfortunately, through my love of history, I've seen too many people that said, you know what, we can do better.
Sure.
And my thing is, I'm like, because the Koch brothers one of them, like, the Koch brothers are two guys that are U.S. citizens that are not elected. The odds of that they haven't committed a crime that they could go to jail for are almost zero. Just by statistical percentage. Most people have committed a crime even not knowing it. When you're that much power and that much money, the odds of it going to your head and you doing more than what most people can, there's a reason why, you know, when it comes to the millionaires and billionaires, it's like they are allowed to do whatever they want and they get away with it. It's because they can afford it. Well, I'm like, well, you know what? That doesn't have to be that way. There's no reason why it has to work that way. And if the system, if it's the laws that are the problem that keeps that from, that lets that happen, then we need to change the laws. If it's, you know, when you're looking at it, I'm like, we've had multiple times where actually one of my favorite ones is we had a U.S. president that got elected basically because he hadn't stolen anything.
Oh, really?
Like, that's how corrupt politics gets, is they just didn't have any dirt on him.
That's
and
hilarious.
Every other eligible character did. And that was the biggest selling point on this president was, I'm drawing a blank on it. It's, you know, we're talking
What
early
era?
1800s.
Oh, early 1800s. Okay.
But it was just one of the times where everything was so corrupt. They just found one guy that they couldn't find any dirt on it, and that was it. It wasn't his politics. It wasn't anything else.
Wow.
They were running him because he just wasn't as corrupt as the rest.
And at that time period, everyone was just more in tune with being suspicious of corruption.
Honestly,
What do you think?
I think currently people are very aware of it.
Okay.
We just have no idea how to fix it.
Right. Or we just kind of accept it like it's gonna be. I mean, it's a funny mix because, you know, we saw Biden get elected. Mm-hmm. He's obviously Democratic establishment. He's been around forever. A candidate that I was personally very invested in the Democratic primaries was Andrew Yang, who he was not establishment. He was a nobody. He did get some traction. He made it pretty far into the debate stages. And one of his appeals that I always enjoyed was that he was pulling Trump voters to his side. He was actually pulling people from the other side, like you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. He wasn't just trying to cater to existing Democratic establishment. But he was getting people from both sides and getting a lot of ex-Trumpers that were really excited about him. And I didn't necessarily agree with everything. Well, I did like a lot of things. And he ultimately didn't win. But I think what we're potentially seeing in America is kind of an intellectual revolution, because we have long-form podcasts, something like this, and we're seeing viewers and ratings of like various big networks that have more sound bites. Those ratings and viewings are going down as the young 20, 30 millennials, we could say. We're consuming less of that, and we're consuming more of long-form conversation, because you can pop it in your ears, and you can be doing the dishes, driving a car, and you can actually get really deep into certain subjects. Not just politics, but everything.
Sure.
And I think, now of course, we're going to say maybe the older generations, they're used to their form of media. I've talked to my in-laws and stuff, and I've tried to get them into podcasts, but it's just too big of a stretch for them, and they just prefer their TV and stuff like that. And occasionally I can put it on in the car for them, and it's like, oh, cool, we're listening to this thing in the car, but they're never going to figure out how to download the app or blah, and it doesn't happen. So they're stuck a little bit getting a filtered lens of news, and I'm not necessarily claiming like all news is fake or whatever. There is plenty of fake news, but what I'm more claiming is that it's a very narrowed, filtered lens, and now you get into podcast world, and there's everything from complete baloney conspiracy stuff in podcast world to maybe like really extreme stuff, but it's all long form. And now people can start to think more. And as people think more and we listen to these podcasts, you start to hear authenticity. And then people that are more authentic, they seem to be more genuine, and people like them better. And that's why you're starting to see these like famous people now who, through podcast world, like a Joe Rogan, who, he's just a small example, but there's a lot of people in the world of YouTube and podcasts who try to be an authentic, genuine person, and it's appealing, and they're getting more views and attention than some news anchor. And what I think we hopefully are going to see, even though Andrew Yang didn't win, but he got a lot of traction, and as you get into politics in the future, and more genuine people that just care, and hopefully don't get caught over by the greed once they do get into power, because that's the scary thing, right? It's
sure.
Like, could you 100% say, certainly, if you became president, that you wouldn't be tempted to like take your profit because, well, I earned this, I worked so hard to get this position, I deserve to get some money on the side,
Well, the argument on that one's pretty easy but it's an old saying, it's absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Sure.
And there's always going to be some certain amount of that goes into it, but it matters on why the person took the job. Mm-hmm. When you go through and it's like, I want to is the person doing it for self-sacrifice? It's one of the things that you can see a problem is when you go see somebody in politics too long. If someone's in politics for 20 years, do you honestly believe they are working as a servant?
Right.
It's just hard to believe, that they are honestly looking at the best interest and not figured out a way to have a cushy job.
Right.
Because, they're not swinging a hammer all day long. They're not going out and producing anything. They're not the builders and the creators and the job people. They're supposed to be the person that's going through and being relevant to maintaining the law today. Well, how long you've been out of the workforce for your entire life, or for 10 years or 20 years, like, you don't live in the real world. So how are you supposed to protect people that do? And I don't know the answer to that question, because someone that's been there knows the political world longer, and there's a value in that experience. And it's an interesting give and take with that. And that's one of the reasons why I like Trump, just to see how does somebody going in as president that doesn't deal with it. Can he go through and surround himself with the people that he needs to go through and be really successful?
Right.
And does he listen to them?
Right.
Because that's, you can't know everything about everything. It's just, as much as I try, because I honestly do try, like I spend pretty much most of my free time learning about something, reading some book, listening to some documentary, just learning about something, because I love to learn stuff, and I love to learn things that change my viewpoints on the world.
So you don't keep up with the latest season of The Bachelorette?
I've never seen one episode. I do. I have some shows. I definitely a Marvel junkie of a bit. But,
okay.
That's not nearly as much content when it comes down to it.
Sure.
But
I don't watch The Bachelorette.
But when you're looking at this stuff, it's like it's always hard to try to figure out what's like. Well, what would you do in that situation? Mm-hmm. And it's like that's why I love to bring up the Lincoln one, because that's the hardest.
Right.
Do you sacrifice American freedom for slave freedom? Do you have the right to make that call? If you were in his shoes, what would you do? Like, being president, can you avoid being corrupt now? I'm like, well, most of the time you can guarantee a $2 million book deal and you're going to get paid $250,000 a year for the rest of your life.
Right.
That's probably more than I'm going to ever need.
Right. Right.
I don't need a jet, you know,
Right.
or
Right.
I mean, at that money, I might need one, but probably won't need a second jet with that kind of money. Like,
Sure.
you know, there's still enough money there that you don't need to go through and game the system to be a billionaire.
Right.
You know, what are you going to do with that much money? What are you trying to do?
Right. Right.
You know, what's the point?
Right.
You want to buy a solid gold toilet? I'm like, sure you can, but why?
Yeah.
You know, what do you get? I got to the point where I'm like, I can buy most of the things I want to be happy.
Right.
A new Porsche isn't going to make me happier or, you know, any happier than my car that I have now. It'll be nice for, you know, a week. It'll be cool. But then the novelty will wear off and then I have a car that I drive that's slightly impractical.
Right. Right.
You know, so it's like the corruption on financial, I feel, is less tempting than the corruption of the power itself.
Right.
It's the ability to feel that you can go through and you have control over other people's lives. I feel that's more dangerous than the thing that people cling to more so than the financials.
Yeah.
You know, people like to complain that, you know, politicians are all millionaires. And I'm like, look at the fundraising from any political run. My house, the elected house for California Senate, which 95% of people do not know who their elected official is for their region in their state.
You're talking about for the direct House representatives.
Not Congress,
in the
but like your local
California
Assembly.
Right.
Most people probably don't know who that is.
Yeah.
I'd say 1 in 20, I think, is a fair bet that they would know who their California.
Oh, I think less.
Maybe less than that.
Yeah, I think like 1 in 100, 1 in 200. Geez, yeah.
Yeah, like that's not a lot of people that know who this person is.
Yeah, you see maybe a few posters around your neighborhood. You're like, oh, that name's familiar. Yeah. Okay, I'll check that box.
But my Assemblywoman in 2016, which is the only campaign one where it had her finances listed, she raised over $1 million.
Okay.
I'm like, if you want to complain about millionaires for like a nothing job that nobody knows who they are, they still raised $1 million in financials.
Sure.
At least to win.
Well, yeah, but it's not like she can just pocket that money.
Matters what state you're in. There's a lot of states where you can.
Just keep it for yourself and buy a house with it?
Yep.
I feel like, no way.
Yep.
You really think so?
Kentucky, I'm pretty sure is definite. There's a number of Midwest states that are very loose on government, you know, regulation on what they do after. If they lose, like if they didn't spend all the money during the campaign, there's a lot that goes into it, on whether it is. Also, you know, heck, Trump is still raising money now.
Right, yeah, he was still getting, post-election.
He hasn't been president for a while now, and people still have donation forms for him for he hasn't declared that he's running, so if he donates money, is it a political contribution, or is it just a gift?
Wow.
You know, it's not nearly as cut and dry, so like, politicians have more than enough ways to get money currently. And that's not including favors from, you know.
Right. That's like on the books. Right?
That's on the books and legal. Like that's the straight donation ones.
Yeah.
And that doesn't include, you know, whatever is off the books or you know, we still have some pretty strong gift rules to keep corporations in, but most of the times it's not direct gifts, it's political contributions.
Sure.
You know, which these days we have almost no laws to protect us anymore because most of them were deemed unconstitutional.
Right.
So, but that one becomes its own kind of nightmare system on the corruption side of it. Like, you know, once you start taking the power away from the people to vote, or at least it's not necessarily your power away to vote, it's your ability to run an effective campaign against someone.
Right.
Because the thing is, if you've got a guy that can put out $10 million for a campaign, and you want to run against him, how are you going to financially get in front of enough people?
Right.
You know, like how are you going to accomplish that? And it's like, well, I guess I also have to go to big companies and use that to raise money.
Right.
Because that's the only real option I have. And then it's like, okay, then can we go to NASCAR and can you guys just please put the brands that own you on your, you know, uniform so that I can see which representative is owned by what company? So this is much like, I'd rather it be honest if it's corrupt.
Right.
You know, if it's owned by companies, I'm more okay with that. I'd rather go see which companies they're owned by so I can choose between, you know, do I want to support Coke or Pepsi? Let's do capitalism correctly where I know that these are all government representatives that are elected by, but the people that I'm like, okay, the person running against you, are you the Coke or are you the Pepsi? Which one's supporting who? Like, I need to know. But we can't even get that information. It's all, you know, some Democrats are trying to change that, but I I have very little faith in the Democratic Party. They always like to talk a big game about stuff, but when
Right.
it comes to actual results,
Following
they
through.
never do.
They have art. I mean, honestly, it's funny that that perspective is the case, right? There's a perspective like, oh, the Democrats talk a lot of talk, but nothing ever follows through. And there's a little bit of an idea like that the Republicans can get stuff done. But I also feel like that it's more that, right, Democrats have like this huge agenda list of all these things they want to do, and they'll maybe hit 5% of that entire list. Well, the Republican list is much shorter because they're supposed to be generally pro less government, less spending. Now, that's not necessarily the case, but there's maybe less line items of things they want to try to address. So it can seem like they get more done just because their total list is smaller. It's like fund some war stuff, help out the oil industry. Okay, but it's not a very long list. Where the Democrats are like, we want to help all these things, and it's a very comprehensive list, obviously. Yeah.
Well, it's actually rarely that. It's not necessarily that the list is shorter.
Mm-hmm.
It's that the Republicans' approach to it is smarter, in that it's more bipartisan. So the Republicans will stand united and kill every bill the Democrats go through and address.
I see, but the Democrats are a little more lenient.
But the Democrats are much more willing to go through and figure out a deal.
Right.
They're like, hey, we're going to put this oil pipeline here. And it's like, well, okay, I'll go through and approve your pipeline, but if you give 25% of the income and the tax revenue from it for schools. Okay. And it's like, they're more willing to go through and step across to, maybe let this thing fly and not get filibustered on every single, case where it has been. And we've seen more of that where the Democrats, because there's also, with the Trump era, we've ended up in a very weird world of politics where you have, because Trump is, a bit of a rabble-rouser or a demagogue. Like, he's one that's really good at stirring up the masses. Right. But there's a lot of Republicans that are scared by that. Sure. That's the same type of figure that we've seen for many, dictatorships in third world countries. Like, that scared a lot of Republicans. Right. Where they're like, yeah, I believe in small government and individual rights, and this guy does not, his actions don't speak anything along what my values are. Sure. So we ended up with more, number of Republicans that are moving away from that and becoming Democrats. There's a whole organization that I heard about, not necessarily they're becoming Democrats, but they're like basically Republicans that are not for Trump. And I'm trying to remember the organization's name. I don't think they're necessarily essentially, I guess, temporarily converting to be a Democrat, but they're like, we're not Democrats either. We're just trying to bring back our old view of what the Republican Party should be, right? Sure. And then I also believe, I think both parties are having a little bit of identity crisis right now, because the Democratic Party, there's definitely Democrats going, what happened to this being the party of like the worker and unions, and why isn't that being our main focus, and still including this language of like, yeah, we want to support all people, all races, right, and be inclusive, but that helping unions and workers, that helps everyone. And there's a little bit of identity crisis, and I think there's a Democratic organization that's trying to re-steer the priority, and they've released this like commercial ad thing that I saw that was again trying to refocus the Democratic Party on like jobs and working again and creating things in America and stuff like that, while still trying to be for the people kind of idea. Yeah, but that's kind of where the battlegrounds are lying, and that's the thing is the Democratic Party has we need to bring America into the modern age group. Hey, from Europe to China, they have free healthcare. Canada, free healthcare. Right. The rest of the world, every first world country in the world has free healthcare except for us. Yeah. We apparently is the claim that we are not competent enough, that we can't afford it. Like the argument goes, I don't know what exactly why it is the way it is, but if every other country, and you can make the argument of size until I realize I'm like, oh no, China has it too. Okay, literally, size doesn't matter. Right. Population doesn't matter. How wealthy they are doesn't matter. They've all made it work. Right. And we can't do it because it's socialist or it's this or it's that. And I'm like, healthcare shouldn't be a capitalist system. When you are shot, you're not going to go shopping. Where should you go buy something? Price, right. You're not going to being able to do capitalism. You have to just deal with the problem that you have. Right. which isn't what capitalism's for. That's, services that are better provided. But so you have, the extreme left or side that's like, we just want to get America kind of where most of the rest of the world is.
Right.
That's the extreme left that we have, is just kind of get where everyone else is.
Well, and the big argument I've always had on it, like there's that argument. There's also just the argument of why, because we basically have a system where you're not really paying out of pocket for medical expenses unless like you're a young person, but you need insurance, and that's just kind of how the current system works. Is you have to have insurance, but insurance is tied to your job. Okay, so what are you saying? Only employed people can have health care, and also it's more the issue in my mind is that since it's tied to your job, it actually makes freedom of movement harder, and now real capitalism can occur, because if workers have less friction to move and change jobs and take higher wages here, but now they're staying at a job they hate for wages that suck, but because they need that health insurance, they have way more friction now in order to change jobs. And now what does that cause? Stagnant wages, because everyone is feeling this huge friction in order to change jobs. But if you freed that friction, now some better free market happen. People can be like, yeah, oh, they're going to pay me more? Cool, gone. But now it's like, oh, there's this thing that I really need for my family and my kids or my wife who's going to have a baby soon or whatever. We need the hospital bills. So that friction is, in my mind, just kind of, it's like it's holding us back from fixing income inequality. It's like the health insurance thing.
Sure, I find that less so, because most of the time if you have a job that has health care and you're going to a job that doesn't, it's probably a step down.
Right, sure.
Just in general.
Well,
so I find that
but maybe they're paying more.
Sure.
Yeah, or maybe it's a job that you're more excited for, but now you can't.
And that follows your passion, and there is that argument, which is a factor. But the bigger thing is, why do we have a system that is built around people that don't do anything profiting off of it? Insurance companies do not provide a service. Right. They just turn profit
by holding a pot of gold.
Yeah. By holding the pot of gold. And I'm like, why is this a system? Well, like I understand the arguments of free healthcare versus not free healthcare, but I'm like, why is there just an entire, like, I get it when it was going through and having an insurance for, a house where it's like, if it catches fire, it's too expensive for anyone to be able to afford it. So if everyone pools their money, we can go through and get it. But you're not regulated to have a house. That's not a requirement. Obamacare was enforcing going through and trying to make sure everyone had health insurance.
So everyone's contributing to the pot.
Contributing to the pot. But the problem became, why are we contributing to, your government regulating everyone to buy from a business? Isn't that is kind of one of the things I'm like, I kind of stand against monopolies. I think they're bad. Right. That's a pretty good thing we established over the 1800s, and even today when we look at all our monopolies and go, this all makes me sad. I would like to get internet. Well, I've got 3 companies to choose from. They're all terrible, and that's all that my options are. And
honestly, at this point, it seems like it's just one. Like at least it depends on the neighborhood.
It's always 2 of the 3. There's 3 of them. They have an agreement not to all compete in the same areas, and they all have very comparable prices.
Well, unless you get to rural areas. I think rural areas, it's just satellite internet.
Yeah, most of the time it's satellite. But anything in a city, there is normally 2 different options. The third one's always out. Like, I cannot get Verizon. Okay. I'm not in their zone. They don't service this area, but I do get the other 2. And if you go up to Valencia, then you'll get 2 of them, which 2 will change, but it's always 2 of them, and it's not a coincidence. Right.
Well, in my commercial corridor where I have my business, the Arrow House, originally getting internet for that was a nightmare, and they said no one serviced. Now this is impossible. I'm in a city, and I can see the lines to these houses across the street, and they're like, oh, your side of the street, which is like these commercial warehouses, a lot of them don't, have internet or need internet because they're just kind of like a manufacturing warehouse. No one lives there or anything, and the office maybe. But to me, it's like, well, the office needs some internet, but maybe not. Maybe they're old school, just phone calls and file cabinets. So I had to get satellite internet for 6 months in LA in an industrial corridor. I had satellite, and I was like, this is ridiculous. And then finally, I got a call saying we just replaced the cable line along that corridor, and now you can get Spectrum or whatever, Sure. And so we got that, but I remember calling around, and it was of the 3, and it was like, don't service. I was like, what? This is absurd. So
So I guess that's lucky that you get a monopoly to deal with.
I guess, yeah.
And it's really, because I use the term monopoly, but it's really a trust. It's just
Right.
a unofficial trust.
Right.
I didn't understand what that was for a long time, and then I was like, oh, so trusts were when everybody just agreed to be one company because it was easier to do the paperwork. And then we made that illegal. So now they do the same thing, they just don't sign the piece of paper that says they're a trust now.
Right. Well, and even antitrust laws are not really enforced all that much at all.
Almost at all. And, that's because corruption.
Right.
That's what it is. It's like, out of the last thing that were an antitrust law that I can remember, it's been, 18 years? 20 years? Something like that? I mean, that's Microsoft.
Right.
It was the last big one that I actually remember a company getting hit for being a monopoly.
Right. Right.
But I can't think of one after that.
I feel like there's been cases or investigations occurring more recently, but they're not, nothing's come of it yet.
Yeah, nothing, but no story's been that big,
Right.
It hasn't been gone through and gotten hit for as an example, Tesla with having its batteries.
Right. Top to bottom, the supply chain, they're trying to control all of it.
Sure, but they're unique in their batteries.
Oh,
their
okay.
batteries are the area that they didn't publicly release. Their trick was to go through and release how to make electric cars, and then hold the patents for how to make the batteries for them.
Interesting.
So that way they didn't have to be the biggest manufacturer of cars. They just needed to get it on the market for the attention, and they could do it. But really what they needed was to go through and also kind of put their money where their mouth is, saying, here's our car, it works, here is how to build it.
500-mile range or whatever.
Yeah, and that's basically what they did. But they own all of the batteries and all the battery patents for it. So if you want to go through and drive your electric car with any type of range on it, you need a Tesla battery.
Right.
And it's like, it was a good marketing move. It was smart. And I'm like, could you hit them for it? I'm like, I don't know. But it's probably but it's like, well, they're not the only battery manufacturers. They're not the only rechargeable battery manufacturers. Still Duracell. And I'm like, technically correct. I cannot argue with you being technically correct, which is kind of how all these why these laws don't get enforced.
Right.
It's because, Amazon is not technically a monopoly. You can go through and buy something directly from a seller or from another website or from, your local thing.
Right.
But it doesn't matter. So many people do that they're effectively a monopoly.
Right. I mean, how much of the online commerce do you think they control? It's like, I think the number is not as high as I thought it was. I think it's 40%, but still 40% would be really high if that was the case.
Well, it's misleading is what it tends to be because they like to use the total. And that's the problem is when you use the total, it's not authentic because it's not the total in the U.S., it's the total worldwide. Well, you know what? India and China both have their own Amazon. And once you take those three and put them all together, I bet you all of a sudden those numbers start getting real small on everybody else.
Wow.
I think India has its own. I'm pretty sure it does. I know Alibaba in China is their Amazon, which is different than what we have, which we have a supply distributor option, but they have a Amazon version, basically their version of Amazon, which is China owned 25% of, like every business.
I see.
But
Alibaba you can buy the stock separate, but you're saying it's still tied to Amazon in some way?
No, I'm saying is their version.
Their
they don't have Amazon.
Got it. It's
Amazon's not there. They have their own Amazon.
Oh, but when you
India
use the
has
number,
its own
40%
Amazon.
of all online commerce, but that's not genuine because it's like, well,
what
you
about the
can't-
two other monopolies that are also playing this game to give us our world
Right.
sales? Like once you factor all of them, I bet you it runs much closer to 90%.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
That's just. But but there's three of them, so it's fair. Except for they're all only restricted to their own countries, so
Right.
it's not even. It's all kind of a smoke and mirrors game anyway when it comes to this kind of type of stuff. It's just always trying to go through and keep people guessing and people confused.
Right.
That's one of the things I hate about the modern day is like if I look up any news story, I'm like, okay, what does this person normally say? What opinion are they trying to sell me on? Are they trying to sell me on an opinion or are they trying to report something?
Sure.
But the report something seems to be the least common of the batch. It's like whenever I went to an argument, or if I was having an argument online, if the guy was trying to sell a book to support whatever he was telling me, he no longer counted as a valid resource for me anymore.
Sure.
Because I'm like, he's only saying this to sell you his book, therefore he is not reputable because he has a financial gain from this argument.
Right.
You know, because I used to argue. I've always loved arguing with people, and it didn't matter what it was because then it gave me something to learn about. You know, I've argued when I was younger. I used to go through and argue about food all the time. That was one of the fun arguments. Was like high fructose corn syrup versus sugar. I'm like,
Okay.
I did that argument back in the day. I did water versus. I learned to go through. I was arguing grape juice versus teas. I've argued a lot of things just on because
alkaline versus acidic water. That's a thing.
And that one's a thing, but I never got on that boat.
Okay.
It was a little too far off of reality. I'm like, I can argue most household things. I can because at least I'll learn something interesting then.
Sure.
You know, how did sugar break down in a human body and what was really the difference was a fascinating thing to learn. And it just gives, like, when I have these arguments, the reason I have them is it gives me normally something I can learn from it.
Sure.
You know, people wouldn't debate it if everyone could agree. So there has to be two sides, which means there has to be a solid foundation for this.
Right. Right.
And sometimes it is founded on lies or craziness, but most of the time it's not. Most of the time there is some type of upset or some type of problem that somebody has that's, you know, given them the solution that they're trying to go through and pitch.
Right.
You know, it's always falls back down to what's the point of things? Why are you trying to do it? And that kind of, a lot of people are going on, you know, trying to prove that they're right.
Right.
And if you're arguing to prove that you're right, most of the time you're not arguing for the truth, which means, once again, we're back to propaganda.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question, which was, first of all, what do you feel like is, let's stick to the United States, what our biggest problem is right now that we should want to fix, that we could all agree we need to fix it.
The problem is that I guess the number one problem that we have in America is that we can't agree.
Okay.
Because the problems that I see, most people will not agree with me. Even though what I consider the biggest issue, most people don't see that as the biggest issue and will have some other thing, and they aren't willing to look at the facts or compare it to history. Because, you know, I'm a big history buff. That's been my biggest thing. When I go through and look at a lot of problems in the world, I can compare what I'll use is compare it to history. What did we do in the past? What didn't work? What did? What can we learn from that? Can we use it now? Does it make sense now? Like, you know, comparing now to history, it's like globalization wasn't a thing.
Right.
So it's not a perfect fit to look at the 1940s or 1950s to today. Those solutions may not fix the problems.
Right.
But they might.
Right.
That, you know, it could have been a factor and could not have. The problem is most people aren't willing to go through and have the conversation because no one can admit they're wrong anymore.
Well, and just on that issue, you know, I went up and saw Hearst Castle, you know, last summer, I think, or a couple of years ago, and it seemed like back then the U.S. could agree on a lot of things, well, because one dude controlled the newspaper that everyone read. So is the solution just have one monopoly news source and now we can all agree and it's all honky-dory? You know, like it's almost like this chaos has emerged because there is too many news sources and there is too much information to rifle through, and no one citizen has the time to rifle through everything. So how do you fix that, you know?
Well, the first thing is the comment on, you know, Hearst as an example, because you want to bring him up. I'm like, sure, but one of the biggest movies and the most praised movies of all time was literally just a smear piece on him, which is Citizen Kane.
Right.
You know, like, to be fair, it's true, but there's also, it wasn't, you know, it's not super clear that way.
Like you're saying, a lot of people knew that was going on at the time.
You know, he didn't win his presidential run.
Right.
Or I don't know if it was president. I know he went for a political office. I don't remember off the top of my head if it was president or not. It might have been governor of California. But
I think you're right. Yeah.
You know, the thing is there's always the argument isn't that we can go through and rely on our news sources, because the thing is there's always going to be two perspectives to it.
Sure.
You know, but the problem is we have trust and opinion now. You go to the news not for going through and looking at reporting. The popular news stations aren't popular on the reporting. They're popular on their opinion pieces.
It's all opinion pieces, yeah.
You know, it's the opinion pieces that are dangerous. You know, if you look at it, I'm like, why would you listen to anything Tucker Carlson has to say, or what's her name on MSNBC? Like, these are not experts in any field.
Right.
These are reporters, and they're not even good at that because they're not reporting on anything. They're giving their opinions about a news story that they read.
Right.
They're not letting anyone make their decisions. If you want to get an opinion on it, then we shouldn't be listening to a reporter's opinions. They're just not the people that are qualified for that.
Right.
And when most of our opinion pieces most of our news is opinion pieces, now there's no news. Opinion pieces don't have to be based in fact.
Right.
They are made up. So if you're going to go through and deal with, you're getting your news sources that are made up, well, I don't know what to tell you.
What about public radio? What about, there was the thought that, public radio can be more factual. But then I know that was a big thing of trying to defund public radio, and that was a couple of years ago, I think. I think they did lose a lot of funding. I'm not sure.
There's a value in public radio because, once again, that gives another voice option. And really, out of anyone that killed us on this front, it was Clinton. Clinton started it. Trump put the nail in the coffin on it because we used to have laws restricting how many media companies could you own.
Right.
You were only allowed to own one.
Right.
You couldn't have these massive conglomerates that we have now.
And I think it was John Oliver that did a segment on how basically it's one news network that owns all these local TV stations, and all these local TV stations can't even do what they want to do because they do the bidding of this one network.
Yeah, he didn't go into the history of it, where that came from, because of the fact that, hey, it was a Democrat that did it.
Sure.
And that
doesn't align with his narrative.
That doesn't align with the narrative.
Sure.
But it started off with...
started under Clinton.
Started under Clinton, and then, it continued with Trump, and now it's like, yeah, we really have, I think it's less than 6 places cover pretty much 90% of the news in America, maybe even more than that. And it's like, we have all of these voices, but if no one sees them, who cares? I get news articles on it. I had one the other day. It's like, yeah, from, I forget what it was, and I look up the company. I'm like, it's a company in Germany with 10 people in it. And I'm like, oh, that reliable company in Germany with 10 people in it. That's the name that I'm going to get my news from. Thank you. I appreciate it so much. But who does that? Who actually goes out of their way to Google the source of the news company, find out how many people work there in a random German, it's a weird thing, but that's how the world works now. You have to go through and find, you can't trust the source of anything.
Yeah.
It's my favorite quote. It's just, everything on the internet is true. Signed, Abraham Lincoln. Most appropriate for the modern day.
Yeah. So you mentioned Abraham Lincoln. We were talking about it earlier. We didn't close circle on that. Do you feel like, and obviously you can't ask him because he's dead, but would you feel like if you could talk to him or find out from him, was he good intentioned purely? Was there ill intent? Oh,
you can see it from his actions. He's one of the few cases in history where you can look at it and go, that was a tough man that went into the world's toughest situation. I don't think, from FDR going in, looking at FDR, looking at Teddy Roosevelt, looking at, Hoover when he dropped the bomb, just all of the president's decisions that have gone through in history, even the rebellion of the revolution itself, I still cannot think of anyone that had tougher decisions than Lincoln.
Wow.
And that's the problem that we have, though, is that Lincoln had to make some of the hardest calls in history. But we don't teach about that man. We don't teach about a guy that had to do some really tough decisions and go through and deal with the nitty-gritty. He had to deal with riots in New York when he went through and tried to implement the draft, and half of New York was burned down, and they had to go through and bring in the National Guards to quell the riots over the draft. That isn't a part of common history. Most people don't know that is, but what's funny is not at least from school, but then you end up people finding this stuff out later on in life.
Sure.
And then they have a hero figure that was, that was worshipped, that turns out not to be a hero.
Sure.
Just a flawed man that did the best he can, that was a really impressive man, but still just a man that did things that were, questionable.
Right.
And the funny thing is my education on it's slightly backwards, because I like to look into the fact that he was a tyrant.
Sure.
So I looked at it from the tyrant perspective for so long that when I finally came around to understanding more of the circumstance of what he was dealing with and really appreciating what decisions he had to make, then all of a sudden I'm like, I was just very impressed with the guy. It's not a hero. He still implemented the draft. He still did a bunch of stuff that was, he got rid of habeas corpus, where, if he could arrest you for without any courts or anything. You could just grab you and throw you in jail and tough luck.
Wow.
Like, you know, if you want to go against freedom, like that's literally one of the core concepts. And like, yeah, he threw that out of the way during the war.
Wow.
And it was to go through and arrest spies and deal with, you know, traitors. And that was his justification. Was it right? I don't know. You know, some things it's always, when you're dealing with that areas, it makes it really hard. You know, going through and rounding up like some things you can look back and go, that was a tough decision, but you made the wrong one. Like those ones you can also see, like going through and when they had the internment camps for Asians during World War II.
Right.
Like, that was a tough decision. I see why they wanted to do that. But you can't lock up American citizens that have committed no crime based on race. That's just not allowed. I don't care what country you're at war with. You want to go through and make a rule where it's like people that have come here from there in the last year? Okay, maybe you can start whittling me down. Maybe there's a compromise in here. But just broadly grabbing everyone,
yeah.
I'm like, no, you're not trying. This is not a system that can work for anyone.
Yeah.
So like when it comes down to Lincoln, my answer on it is like, it's funny because he was the tyrant for everybody. In the end, I'm like, he's just a guy that wanted to try and keep America America.
Right.
And get us past and not go through and have people own other people.
Right. Right.
And I'm like, I can't argue, like as much as I want to argue with his method and what, you know, do the ends justify the means, his purpose was always right.
Right.
And that's the thing you always got to keep in mind with some of these figures is like, were they, I mean, most people's purpose are right too, though. I feel like even Trump, with all of his flaws, I think he was doing what he thought was the best.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think he is that well educated on certain topics. I think
he's stubborn. He's not willing to listen to advisors.
Yeah. He considers himself an expert in every field, and I'm like,
that's the problem.
And you obviously didn't read enough Socrates. Like big failings in his education, and that's and that's it. It's just like otherwise, it's like I feel like. He honestly wanted to do good and thought he was doing the best thing for the American people. I still believe that to this day. He was trying. I think he was also trying to enrich himself. But
sure.
Once again, a little corruption I still consider fine. I knew that when I voted for him. I'm like,
sure.
Yeah, he's a businessman. He wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't good business.
Right.
Like you can just we always assume.
And when we say a little, for sure it's a lot. I mean, I got wealthy one day just by following his tweet, and which was I think it was this past summer. He tweets in the evening that Kodak is going to get a bunch of money to do vaccine research. Kodak, the disposable film company.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that, and of course, pre his tweet, it already had jumped from $1 to $8. And the tweet was released just like right as the market closed. So I set an order of I was just playing around. Let's do like $1,000 and buy it right when it opens. And of course, it runs up. They had a crazy day, and I think it spiked it. They had to stop it trading 4 or 5 times that morning. And I'm just watching it, it freezes, and I was like, oh gosh, it froze. It's gonna trash. I'm gonna sell it. And I got out. What you would say is too early, but it's all happening so fast.
Sure.
But I quadrupled my money in 2 hours off of a tweet, and it's but he and whoever else was in on it, he probably sold it to 52 or whatever. It takes the big money to make it do the final drop, You
know what the odds are, though? He probably didn't sell it at the 52.
Right, he probably sold it. But he made some, but he probably didn't hit the peak.
He probably didn't hit the peak either. But
sure.
The thing is if you can go through and do that, you don't need to.
Right.
You know what? If you could send a tweet and double your total net worth.
Right. Instantly. Yeah.
Net worth. How many times do you need to do that?
Yeah.
You can do it 4 or 5 times and be done, and it wouldn't matter. But
even Elon tends to do that too, and I imagine it's very tempting to be like, I could send a tweet and make this crypto go crazy, or make this stock go crazy. Good thing I just dumped the position or bought the position, And
because right now he could sell off his $1 billion in Bitcoin and go, hey everyone, I just sold my $1 billion in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. He sold it before the announcement. It's totally legal to make that play.
Yeah.
He's just being public. He's literally just being public with his decisions.
Right.
But that's the thing is the system is the big problem with capitalism, and especially in the stock market, and that's the reason why, like, once you get you start doing well, and you're like, yeah, I'm doing well, but it's a rigged game. 80% of the stock market's owned by like less than 100 people.
Right.
So it's like what little profits you're getting out of it is enough. It's a lot to you, but to the people that own everything, it's like it's just enough to keep you guys happy.
Right.
That's what we need. The stock market design, a lot of this design currently, I feel like that was one of the reasons why we got moved into 401ks instead of pensions.
To get us more involved in that game.
Yeah, now everyone roots for the stock market as opposed to against them. So now that everyone's invested in the stock market, but it's all still held by hedge funds and by players of that game. It still falls inside their rules.
Right.
But that's the reason why the reason why GameStop was hilarious is because they went through and took on one of these big hedge firms and did pretty well against it, all things concerned.
Right. But that must give hope then, right? If somehow, I think a lot of those what they call retail traders, a lot of them still have decent sizable portfolios that they're able to cause some decent swings. But like you said, they're nothing like these giant hedge funds, that have billions of capital to work with. But I think it gave people hope that collectively they can pool the resources and have an impact. But then it makes you wonder how much of that is true, or was it just some other hedge funds getting in on the fund punishing the other hedge fund? You know what I mean?
Well, the thing is it was definitely the hedge funds getting in on it, but they didn't.
They got in later.
There was that they followed the momentum. Once it was, it was too risky to go in as a hedge fund.
But the retailers set the momentum.
But once the retailer set the momentum, now there was a way to go in and get out and just turn a quick profit and they can leave the retailers on to swing at the end of it. That's not what they do, And most of the time they're only going in with very specific limited goals. Double, triple your money.
Right.
Do that in a day, get out. You're happy.
Right.
Because there's no reason to get greedy. They don't need to turn $10,000 into $100,000. They don't need that's not what they need. They've got time, they've got money. Make the money on the opportunities you see. If it's not a sure thing, play it safe.
Right.
No reason not to.
Right.
But watching the one guy get crushed, but watching the one guy go down is always the best part. Wait, you shorted a company for more stocks than exist. That's really dumb and shouldn't be illegal. Or shouldn't be legal. You shouldn't be able to go through and get stocks for you're not able to buy stocks that don't exist.
Right.
But that's what the hedge fund did. And they're like, oh wait, you literally can't. If we buy up all of the stocks, you literally have to buy them for us for any price. It could be $1 billion of stock and it would still technically work.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and that was hilarious that they went through and did that because of the fact it's like it punished people for being greedy.
Right.
And if other hedge funds jumped in on it to turn a profit while also punishing someone for being greedy, I'm like, that makes sense. If I were in their shoes, I'd probably do the same thing. Right. And you probably shouldn't make bets where you can't. They're unsecured gambling bets that are impossible to secure, even though you're pretty sure that it's a sure thing.
Right. Yeah, and it's wild because there's obviously the argument of people that go that this phenomena doesn't make any sense because the stock market's supposed to be the concept of investing in a piece in a company, and it's supposed to more or less, the value of the stock should more or less follow the actual value of what that stock should be based on the earnings and production. And people's thing were like, this GameStop thing shouldn't be happening because obviously one stock or GameStop is not worth $400, or whatever.
Sure.
This defies the rules of capitalism. We need to regulate this or control this. And in this case, we're kind of happy that regulation wasn't there because in this case it was kind of, hoping the little guys got out, but I think a lot of the little guys didn't get out.
Sure.
But it's still kind of chopping in the 100 zones anyway, so if they got in early enough. I got to personally ride the AMC wave, not intentionally. I just we had hope that maybe movie theaters could come back. So I had bought like a bunch at $4, and then it ran up to 16, and I got out, and I was like, whoa, it's definitely not worth that. So I'm getting out.
But it's like that system. Like the funny thing is, the metrics have never even made sense when it comes to tech companies.
Sure. Yeah.
They don't even apply to tech companies. It's like all those rules that you're talking about just don't apply.
Well, it's different because it's so forward thinking. Yeah.
Sure. But the other thing that people don't take into account, it's like, you were talking earlier on, having companies go through and, not be able to work on computers and how that would go through and smash big tech.
Right.
But big tech is is interesting because it shows the future of like, if you think about, let's say, I think it's Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
How many staff does Facebook have?
Right.
Honestly. Let's say, like, they're a pretty big company.
Maybe 1,000.
Probably 1,000. So it's a multi-billion-dollar company that employs 1,000 people.
Which is like nothing.
Which is nothing. So is this good for like, what's normally the whole point of having companies, the point of having companies is to give people work, to produce products that are valuable to people, to have trade. That's the whole argument for capitalism.
Right.
So, like, you want to argue on behalf of capitalism, I'm like, well, then explain Facebook to me. How does that help anyone? All that is make a bunch of rich people rich and doesn't contribute to anything. That's the modern banking system to this, at least they have actual branches and people have jobs there. But, like, Facebook's a great example. But, that's going to be a lot of industries,
Right. I think I read a stat that for every, $1 million company this way, the average number of employees is 10. I think it's like 10 employees for $1 million company. That's like the average these days. Where obviously pre-computers, that would not be the case.
No,
humans were necessary.
You needed people to it, and as technology advances, people just become less needed.
Right.
There's just more efficient ways to do it.
And that's kind of it's hard to know the chicken or the egg here, but we have a lot of income inequality. And earlier when I asked you the question, our biggest problem, you said we can't seem to agree. And what comes to mind for me is really income inequality. And then the question is, how is that being caused? There's so many things that could be causing it, but one thing is definitely like innovation and the fact that you need less people. So the demand for unskilled labor just goes down and down and down and down, causing a bigger and bigger divide. But and then the big problem, as more and more of the inequality gets harsher, then you have problems like homelessness growing. You have problems where people can't even really actively participate in this capitalist system because they're just priced out, or they just can only buy necessary goods. They can't participate in buying like luxury goods, and it's a scary spiral because as it gets too unequal, you actually wonder, and I think you start to see it where some of the rich guys are saying we need to fix this because if we don't fix this, no one's going to buy our stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's where it gets unstable.
Well, the problem is we've actually it's the area that no one talks about, which I found really fascinating, which is the culture of the rich.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to draw a blank on his name, but anyway, Milton Friedman.
Milton Friedman, yes.
Being one of the ones that was encouraging, the capitalism greed model of his time, trying to move towards that direction. And it was funny because...
That's trickled down in economics, basically.
Well, his argument was, when it comes to a company's job is to turn a profit. They have shareholders that they report to. They own the company. He has to work in the shareholders' best interest as well as his employees. He's not an elected official. It's not his job to go through and worry about the economy. It's not his job to worry about, the individual people's or, health insurance or any of that stuff. That's not their job. They're not elected representation. They're a person whose job is to make money.
Right.
That is, what that comes down to. And, that became corrupted over time once, they started buying politicians and politicians started changing laws so that no one was looking out for those. But really the thing that was really fascinating from that time period and looking into it was it was a cultural difference. When you were going through in the 1940s, 1950s, the average gap between the lowest paid employee and the top paid employee was about 19.
Sure.
And the rest of the people at the country club at the time would go through and, basically give shit to people that went through and paid themselves too much. Because they were worried that they were going to blow the game up for everyone. You go through and you start turning huge profit margins, all of a sudden your workforce starts shutting down. Then you start, if you went through and tried to have the CEO pay now of, back then when we had stronger labor unions, it would never fly.
Right.
Amazon would have been shut down in a minute if we had the labor unions in the 1950s because that would all be one union.
Yeah, people were a little tougher then about mobilizing and getting together and fighting back.
Yeah, and making sure that, they keep people fair. But that encouraged a culture in the rich so that they didn't have to do that. The actual rich could self-regulate because they didn't want to deal with having shutdowns in the neighboring people. They didn't want, because once one guy starts it, then the other ones start going, hey, why am I not paid so much? Why are you paid so much?
Right, because you want to keep up with your rich neighbor kind of effect.
Yeah, it's the same rich neighbor thing. But also it's like the outrage storm. It's the one person getting mad and then going, oh, they're protesting? Screw it. I'm going to protest. My situation's worse than theirs.
Right.
I wasn't going to pull the trigger necessarily, but now that we're doing that, let's do that. That people tend to run that way. And, that has been, our labor unions have been destroyed over time since Reagan, went through and tried to go through it. And it's hilarious because I've been, told how bad unions were my entire life. It's like they hold too much political power. They spend all the time trying to just get rich themselves, and they don't worry about anyone else.
Sure.
But that there are a lot of the people.
But there are a lot of, exactly.
You're like, oh, you're trying to make most of the people get money.
It's members of the union. So it's like, well, wait, they're working in their best interest.
They're working in their best interest.
That's good.
And it's good, but
a good amount of people.
But the problem is not that we have big unions, it's we just don't have enough unions. The problem, and corruption in unions. Corruption in unions is a problem that needs to be caught, should be regulated down, but that's another problem in itself.
Right. But it's not a reason to throw it all out entirely. And I think right now, currently, there's a whole issue with Amazon workers trying to unionize right now, and I think that's in the news happening in Alabama, I want to say. And Killer Mike was given, although that's not his name, that's his stage name, but he was given a nice speech and stuff like that and trying to help mobilize people to fight back and push back against Amazon. And basically he was saying, if they don't allow this unionization to happen, he's like, I'm going to stop buying from Amazon, and who knows what kind of effect that could have. But if enough people care, the problem is oftentimes it's only the people that want to unionize that care, and nobody else cares, and then it's hard for it to happen.
Well, it's the problem with it is that this is the problem with capitalism. When you get to the point where you are financially, it becomes very difficult to make a conscientious choice. You will not make the conscientious choice because you don't have a choice.
Right, because you need to survive.
You need to survive. If you go through and are going, cool, I can go into Home Depot and I can buy this hammer for $8, or I can buy it online for $3 and have it shipped to me from China. You're like, yeah, but Amazon's mean to their employees. I'm like, it's $5, dude. I don't care.
Right.
I'm sorry. I wish you did better, but I can't. That's not my burden. I have my own family to feed. I have to live my own life.
Right.
And that's the system. It's like people like to say that the morality of a business can come into play on it, but most people can't afford to take morality into account. They look at price. If anyone took morality into account, Walmart wouldn't be a company.
Sure.
It always has been terrible. Its malpractices its practices have been corrupt ever since its reputation's super long. Everyone knows that Walmart's terrible.
Right.
From sourcing in China and destroying American manufacturing jobs to moving into small towns, intentionally operating at a loss until the local businesses go out of business and then raising prices.
Yeah, that conversation has been kind of out of the news for a while now.
Yeah, but it's everyone knows it.
But
it's
still happening.
It's not news.
Right.
It's like gang violence stories from the 80s. They're still happening just as much as they were in the 80s, just not news anymore. Everyone knows and no one cares. It's like if it's not going to go through and generate clicks, the news doesn't care.
Yeah.
Either way. It's actually the hardest thing about news, I've realized, because I kept looking at it because a news story wants to encourage you to go through and get you to click on it.
Right.
That's how they make money.
Right.
They want you to buy their newspaper. They need your attention. So they have been sensationalized to get you to do that, either one viewpoint or the other. And both sides are equally guilty on this. It's just our whole model is built on getting you to go through and click on things and get your attention and grab it. So they're going to take away your guns, or they're going to outlaw abortion everywhere. Like if Klobuchar goes, goodbye abortion rights, and Biden got elected, now they're going to be kicking in your door and taking your guns. Like that's most news stories on either of those topics. If you look at any gun control story from the right, they're about to kick in the door and take your guns. That's what they're trying to do.
Right.
And that's what all of the politicians say too, because it gets attention.
Right.
But that doesn't get us any facts. That doesn't help anyone. It keeps people upset. It keeps engagement.
Right.
But we don't get smarter.
Right.
You know, it doesn't increase the conversation. And as time has gone on, and as the financial motivation has gone this way, even more so than it used to be. Because before, you guys went, so many households are watching screens. You have 7 TV channels to choose from. Pick one.
Right.
You know, that's what you get. Like that's where your source of information. Or you have a local newspaper, a couple international newspapers, and that's it. Well, they didn't have to fight for your clicks, so they didn't have to sensationalize that.
Sure.
But now that there's so much more competition from little guys and you can go anywhere, now all of a sudden they need to go through and work harder to get your attention.
Okay, so maybe there's, this is sounding pretty scary and hopeless, but maybe I hear actually a little hope there, which is maybe this is that last gasp as it's struggling to hang on before people just don't put up with it anymore. Like the views and clicks, people get so numb to it. It's kind of like, I'm a traffic engineer, and we talk about how even signs, traffic signs, people get numb to them, and you start to filter them out and not even notice them anymore. So we have an issue, whether it's speed limit signs or, stop signs, and usually it's more regulatory things like, children at play, like these kind of things.
Sure.
People get numb to those, and you just start ignoring them. Especially if you start putting up too many signs. It's like sign pollution. It becomes clutter, and you get numb. And I wonder if this is that last gasp, and there's not that many people left who are still, I find myself at this point almost never getting caught into a clickbait article unless I'm choosing to, like I'm going, I know this is clickbait, or I know this wants me to click on this, and if it's a particular news story that's like, I won't click on it, but if it's like, they're filtering this algorithm because it's about a cartoon that I really like. Okay, sure. I'm gonna click on this thing because they tracked me and they know that I like this cartoon, and even the title is kind of clickbaity, like, are they gonna cancel the show? But I might still click on it because I really am interested in the show, and if there is any relevant information, I'll click on it. So I'm hoping that maybe more and more people start to see through the bullshit, and as it dies, maybe that will go away. I don't know.
I think what my hope on it comes to that people will go through and realize that these things that people keep calling foul. At some time you're going to realize when the news source keeps telling you shit that's wrong,
right,
that they're wrong.
Right.
That's all. And it doesn't have to be, and then all of a sudden the guy that was in the middle, that was just trying to report, hey, yeah, they're voting on a bill to go through and consider closing a loophole so that if you bought a gun in one state and shipped it to another one, it turns out that you're going to have to wait a little longer for them to finish the background checks on internet when dealing with shipping,
sure.
Right? So it turns out they weren't kicking people's doors down and seizing guns. Like, when they give the actual news story, that people might find an actual news source.
Right.
And then they might go through and share the actual news source.
Right.
Find the ones that are in the middle that are covering stuff where it's a little bit, hey, here's the facts. We don't have opinion writers. Because why? There's no reason. Here's factual reporting on what happened.
Right.
Make your own opinions.
Right.
If there's plenty of people on the internet that you can listen to that will have an opinion on this, go do that.
Right.
But we're a news station. We should give you news. And then other people should go through and decide what it makes them feel like. So I feel like in time, right now it's going towards this is sensational, but I have a feeling that's going to blow back the other way because now they're just getting into YouTube's zone. They're just getting into Twitter's zone. They're just getting into social media, and they're acting more like social media than news.
Sure.
And I feel like that appeal will burn off, and people will go back to going, I just want to. What happened today?
Right.
Okay. Some terrorist blew up something in another country. A dictator's doing something shitty, and the Republicans are complaining because Democrats are in charge. Good. That's what I wanted to know. That's it. And the Democrats are fighting each other because they're not sure if they need to want to, give everyone $100 or $101. They can't make up their mind, and that's what my news source is. And it's like I don't need their opinion. I'll make my own opinion, or I'll find somebody that's smarter than I am, and I'll listen to their opinion.
Sure.
But it's not going to be random news person. Like I don't get why these people are held in regard that their opinion matters.
Right.
That's the thing that's weird. It's like, why do we give so much respect to the opinion of, and same goes for comedians too. Like I like John Oliver a lot, but I don't think he's a particularly brilliant man.
Sure. He's got a lot of good writers.
He's got a lot of good writers. But every time I've tried to fact check his writers are very good at fact checking themselves, so I can't find any flaws with it.
Sure.
When I've tried to do that on the other side, it doesn't hold up as well. The right stories tend to fall apart when I look into the facts, or they're very misleading.
Sure.
But, there's exceptions to that in both cases, but it's just, when you're trying to go through, and these days I find politics is harder because I feel the more extreme views have become harder to defend.
Right.
Because they're not backed up by anything. They're just kind of screaming into the wind for me.
Yeah.
And it's like some of them I'm like, no, I'm fine with it. But you're like, no, Trump was a hero character. I'm like, Trump was not a hero. He may not have been a villain, but he definitely wasn't the hero of the working man. Like, That's not anywhere close to what he is. He may have gone through and done some things that were positive. I'll give you that. But he's not the hero character. And he also probably isn't the villain when it comes down to it. He was just another guy that did the best he could.
Sure.
But, yeah, that's...
Yeah, I think on the behalf of people that defend Trump, I think that it's really hard not to bring emotion involved, even though I think they would say, oh well, the left are always so emotional and we're really logical and rational. It's like, no, you guys get just as emotional. I think it's natural for them to get emotional though when it seemed like at every corner, every news outlet was painting him as bad, or every single decision he made, try to paint the story into how it was the most evil thing of all evil intent. And I could understand why they would get so, and honestly, it's sometimes upsetting to be like, man, why did this left-leaning station have to smear that so bad? Because now it's just creating unnecessary division when it could have been a little less more factual and a little less spinny of maybe there was negative intent, but maybe it wasn't that harsh negative intent. And, it's interesting.
But it's the same thing. Both sides are just as guilty. Yeah. They both are trying to get your clicks. Trump's, going to go through and start murdering Mexicans in the streets. Like, they'll go with any story that they can to get clicks, and he's sending the troops to invade Portland. Like, these stories were always, pretty ridiculous. So Trump was so out there, I was surprised too many times by what I thought was a clickbait story that turned out to just be factual reporting. Right. Like Trump saying, I'm going to take your guns away, and I don't, the court system's slow, so maybe we just take them away before it goes to the courts. I'm like, Trump just said he's going to take people's guns without due process. Like, no Democrats ever said that, and you just said that, and it's not clickbait or crazy stuff. That's a video. There's no additional thing. That's literally all he said. Yeah. Okay. Like that was hard with Trump because Trump. That was hard
because a lot. Yeah, that was hard with Trump, and I already hated the guy. But then it was like, oh, these are clips of him actually talking, and you're like, wow, he just said that, and you're like, oh man,
And so I try and give benefit of the doubt, and that like maybe there's missing context, and I'm like, all right, let me go through.
Find the full clip.
Find the full clip. Then I watch the full clip, and I went. No, that news story basically summed it up. Like, this is really hard to argue with, like, because you got to give people the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. You have because the thing is it's most of the time there's something you're missing.
Right.
there's a good argument for why universal health care is not going to work in the U.S.
Sure.
There's very solid ones.
Sure.
There's good arguments against 15 an hour.
Sure.
You know, a lot of the Democrat policies that we have, there's solid arguments against it. But most people don't find out what they are.
Right.
Or, you know, I've always been more of the historical. I'd rather go through and find a point in time in history and go, well, what were we doing back then? That seemed to work. Can we go back to what we were doing?
Sure.
And then, like, kind of figure it out from there on what we've done since then that was good ideas and keep those and get rid of the ones that were bad. You know, like the 15 an hour minimum wage. I'm like, well, if we kept up with inflation, it would be 10.75. Can we get 10.75?
Right.
Everyone should be able to agree that it used to be that, so can we just have that?
Right. But you can also make an argument for, because this is oftentimes the argument that like maybe Bernie Sanders makes for his 15 an hour, is that, remember we talked about earlier about the salary of the CEOs being 19 times the common worker.
Sure.
And let's say the minimum wage was $7.25 at the time. And you say, oh, at least bring it up to current inflation, but you could also say, oh, we'll also bring it current to being appropriate to that ratio. In that case, it'd probably be like $200 an hour.
No, if you...
You know, if you wanted to try... It's just what's your metric that you want to compare? Because, oh, it was working well at that time. Well, at that time, it was only 19 times. Then it was only a 19-time difference. So,
sure. But then the thing is there was no reason to pay yourself that much money back then.
Right.
Because you were taxed... If you were over... I think equivalent today was $400 million. If you were making over $400 million, it was being taxed at 95%.
But that was only a short period, right?
Like 20 years.
It was a 20-year period.
From like the 40s to like, there's some small fluctuations, but we were in the 70s until we had that bracket of the high 70s until Reagan. Because Reagan, one of his famous quotes was, I only do 2 movies a year because if I do a third one, the government takes it all. So that was still basically in play until Reagan.
And then he was able to revoke it.
And he was the one that got rid of it, and that's where we got trickle-down economics. But the theory is, if Reagan made that money, then he would...
make more movies, right.
And that would employ more people. Well, I don't know the logic when you apply it to Reagan's job specifically, how you justify trickle-down economics. Like, you're an actor. You create no jobs. Why does anyone believe that you getting paid extra money to do that third movie?
Well, no, he does. He does because if you're a big name actor, then if a studio can guarantee that because this actor pulls this many ticket sales, if you release 4 movies, they can pull in, you know, that additional amount of money each time. So that means hiring more crews to film, you know, that many more shows.
You know, that's a pretty arrogant approach from anyone. You're like, if I don't make this movie, I'm costing the economy like millions of dollars. If I don't make, I'm like, you're not that good an actor, dude. I've not seen any of your movies.
Right.
Like, none of them lasted through history. You weren't that good.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So wow, we got rid of that then, huh?
So, but we got rid of it on but the thing about it, and this is what I hate the most, it makes sense on paper.
Once it gets beyond a certain level.
Well, at the time, it made sense on paper. It totally did. And I can't argue with them passing it. What you argue with is when you see that they don't work and we don't change.
Right.
You know, going through and guaranteeing grants for colleges made sense on paper. It made it so that everyone had the right to go through and had a chance to go through and go to college. But then it turned out that it ballooned it to the point where our tuition debt is higher than all of our credit card debt.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, so we've proven this is not a good system. But has one Democrat talked about blowing up the loan system? They're talking about forgiving debt. I'm like, that doesn't...
Right, but not actually just overhauling the whole system.
Then talk about overhauling the system. Like, maybe blow up the entire loan system and go with a free work college system.
Right.
Or just something else. I don't care actually what you replace it with. We just know what we have doesn't work. Right. Stop doing it. Do something else. I don't care what it is.
Right.
And if that doesn't work, do something else. Like, we just refuse to admit when we make mistakes. We're just like, oh, well, this is terrible. I guess I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Oh, my razor that I'm shaving this morning with is really rusty. Well, I'm just going to keep shaving instead of acknowledging that I've made a mistake. Like,
well, here's some free Band-Aids.
It's insane. I'm like... And that's both sides. And I think that the Democrats are worse about it than the Republicans. The Republicans rarely want to pass anything, so they make less mistakes on it.
Sure.
And most of the time when they do, though, they normally will acknowledge it when they're like, oh, yeah, we did go, you know, that probably was a mistake, and maybe we shouldn't have given tax write-offs to that company because it turns out they were, Enron,
Right.
or, the bailouts. It's like, but most of the time they go, I didn't vote for it.
Right.
Those are people, I didn't vote for that one.
Yeah.
You're like, you did vote for it. You're like, no, I don't remember. I don't remember voting for it.
I do think this is an interesting argument, and it's a right-leaning argument that resonates with me, but I'll let you attack it if you want, which is taking college, but it also applies to housing. So it applies to both, which is as soon as you enter financing into something where people can get loans for something, it increases the access for people to get said thing, house, college, but it will balloon the cost of that thing because now there's just more demand. So if we look at housing, now the whole 30-year mortgage thing was actually, I think, net good originally when it was passed, because it allowed so many people to now go out to the suburbs or whatever and own a home, and here you don't need to save up all this cash to buy a house cash. You can just get a down payment, and then here's a fixed interest rate, et cetera, et cetera. And it's great, and a lot of people can get houses to this day. But it almost instantaneously, artificially raised that threshold of how much a house should cost, versus if everyone had to save up money to buy a house cash, it definitely would decrease the price of housing. It just would, because there'd just be less buyers.
Sure. And you couldn't afford it.
And then once you own it, you just own it, and there's no debt hanging over you, or if there's a big crash, no, you just own the house. You're not going to be upside down or anything like that. You also, if there aren't financials related to it, you can't take a loan against your house, so then leverage yourself, and then leverage yourself, and leverage yourself, and then completely collapse when the market hits a downturn or whatever. In general, though, it's hard for me to say that I like that, because I think if you're responsible, you can do really well with doing that. It's just sometimes when people get taken advantage of, or they don't know what they're signing up for, that then it can lead to a bad path. But with college, at least, it used to be you just had to pay for college. There were no loans. So the price of college was a lot lower. And I don't know on the timeline when it definitely started to go up. And partially was, I think, just a cultural thing where the thought was, if you wanted to get a good job and make money, you need to go to college. And I don't even know if it was necessarily the financing of it and leveraging through, giving loans and stuff like that for college. But I definitely have heard a case for there's another idea, which is, this is more like subconscious, but if someone wants to go to college, but they actually have to pay for it, a kid, and the kid, works part-time, but he's actually seeing the physical dollars that he's working for and then having to pay for his tuition, he might stick it through more, or pick a major that maybe be more helpful for society, and it's not to trash certain majors, but there obviously are some majors that are maybe more likely to definitely be a job versus not being a job. And I'm going on a lot of tangents here, but I want to let you go for a second.
Well, the question becomes, from a government perspective, what is the purpose of college?
To educate the populace so that they can make more money and in turn pay more taxes, so that they can increase their ability to then give back, spend taxes on government things. Okay. That's what I would think, is invest in your workforce. They in turn give money back to you via taxes. So it's a net benefit, because they get a better life and you as the government get more money as well.
So that means, so you're saying from a government perspective, the value of college is its value to the workforce.
It's its value at educating the populace in order to be more productive individuals in a capitalist system.
If that's the solution, if you think that's the purpose, then we shouldn't be investing government money in colleges at all.
We shouldn't be investing in government money.
You invest money in trade schools, nursing schools, and actual skill jobs that are designed to employ people. You get it so that a person can go to any trade college they want for free.
Right.
You get to one trade college for free.
Right.
We maintain higher education as an option for those that wish to improve, to have a better thing. but not government fund it. Let the price change work itself out, and you still get to accomplish what the government wanted.
Right.
And at the same time, the people are going to come out of a trade school with a trade.
Right. Right.
They will know how to do something. Right. Now, you may end up with too many of a trade worker, but that's a much better problem.
That's a better problem to have. Yeah. Too many plumbers. Yeah,
too many plumbers is a great problem to have because they can at least do something.
Right.
They can start their own business. They can try and do other things.
Right.
But our education system one of the biggest problems with the American education system is it's pointless.
Yeah.
In that, not that there's no value in it, it doesn't have a specific point.
Intent, yeah.
It's not, it was designed to train people to work in factories. Our entire regimentation system is built to train people to work in factories. Right. That's why it started with a bell and ended with a bell, and everything about our entire school system was built to simulate factory work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But that was what it was for. Now, what do we need people doing? What's the point? We've ended up with a lot of people that ended up with, we have a 2-parent workforce, we need a daycare.
Right.
To take care of the children. And if they learn something, great. But we have a workforce that needs daycare services, so that is what a lot of public education became.
Sure.
Because that was what was needed. And we haven't, it hasn't gotten to the point where there is a specific, you're not taught how to file taxes, in school. You're not taught the differences between the two parties, the philosophical debate between it. You don't come in understanding what the nuance of any of these arguments are. You'll have some discussion of current events. You might get some history. You'll get some math that you'll never use. They're like, you look at a lot of these skills, I'm like, it always seems like a bunch of different ideas that people had that they thought were important that kind of just got jumbled together.
Sure.
And never really
a cohesive vision.
There's no cohesive vision for what an education should be.
Sure.
What is the person supposed to be able to do at the end of it?
Right.
That's not you can't test it.
Right.
Our education system is we want them to be able, you want them to be able to write a novel? Or do you want them to be able to work in a factory? What's the point of your education?
Right.
Are they just supposed to be set up for higher learning and they don't really know how to go through and do the other stuff? There's a lot there, but it doesn't seem like there's a point to it.
Yeah, you could make a positive argument that it just kind of sets a general baseline of some general knowledge in a bunch of different things. And then it's kind of the kids/parents/family's responsibility for that kid to find their own direction and then go seek it via internships, via extracurriculars, via mentoring, whatever it is.
It sounds like you're being thrown to the wild.
But
that's what it sounds like right there. You're coming out of hey, you're finished school, figure it out.
Which it doesn't make sense because if anything, if that's what I never understood about it was if the government truly wants more, and even the rich, corporations, the stock market, you generally want people to produce more, then why wouldn't you? And if they produce more taxes, and so it's like a self-fulfilling system. Then why wouldn't you want a more skilled, educated populace? And why hasn't that been made a priority? And it seems like even since I was a kid, it's dangerous. Oh, because they're too educated.
Yeah. Think about if you go through and read a history book from 1950. Or read any textbook from 1950.
Right. The words are bigger.
It's harder.
Right.
It's just harder than it is today.
Right.
A lot of the books have been dumbed down.
Sure.
The subjects that we talk about are, a lot of good feeling type subjects. Back to my history thing, patriotic history. Let's talk about all the heroes.
Yeah.
That doesn't, I honestly, my viewpoint on history is I feel like patriotic history is great for children.
Sure.
Inspire the young to do great things. Learn about Thomas Jefferson. Learn about Shakespeare. Learn about all these inspirational characters, the founding fathers, just all these people that accomplished amazing things so that you too can be inspired of the things you can accomplish.
Right.
But when it comes to being, in high school, you should be learning about the mistakes we've made so we don't make them again.
Right. All the gritty stuff.
That's where the gritty stuff comes in. And a lot of history teachers want to teach history for the sake of knowing history, and that's the reason why it's all about memorizing dates and memorizing files, and it's history for the sake of history, which is nice, but it doesn't help anyone.
Right.
We need to know what mistakes have we made. Like, I was never taught that, hey, did you know in 1950s America was much more socialist than it is today?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where it was apparently we had a left and a left, and those were both your parties. It wasn't until Reagan came along, or until Nixon came along, did you start getting a right again after, they tried that was basically how it went into a lot of Americans. From the end of the Industrial Revolution, you ended up with two lefts until we got Nixon.
Wow.
And I'm like, why didn't anyone tell me that? I think of the golden days of America, I think that's a conservative viewpoint.
Right.
1950s, I'm thinking, yeah, that's, that would be what conservatism is. I want to go back to that. I'm like, well, then you want to be progressive and support labor unions and do this stuff. And they're like, the right doesn't do that at all. The thing that want to go back to the way it was more left. And the funny thing is, most of the Democrats don't want to go that way either. Like you were talking before, the labor unions helping the little guy. A lot of people are either promoting a welfare state or some other thing where it's not really focused on the worker, but on free handouts or worrying about, bigger problems, things that they don't consider the worker the priority. They consider climate change or something else as what's important.
Right.
And it's like, that's nice and all, but you're gonna have to pick what pick your battles. And that's, always the problem is like, what do you want to use? What's your ideal? And I feel like that's the thing that most politicians are missing is they don't know really what the ideal situation would be like. They just know there's a better one than what we have.
Sure.
And I'm like, well, no one knows the answer of how good it could be. But I can tell you in 1950s that, out of 70% of households had one parent that worked and everyone, and had the wife didn't and stayed home and took care of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
That the pay they made then per house is only about 5 to 10% lower than it is today, but that's because two people are working.
Right.
When they have twice as many, so in reality, we're actually making almost half as much as it was then.
Right. Yeah.
And what the worst part of that is? You can't find a statistic for that.
You can't find a statistic on that.
Average wage is the average of how much someone gets paid.
Mm.
Well, I paid myself $1 billion. Seems like everyone's making a lot of money now. Average wages are useless because the ultra rich can pay themselves any amount of money and it skews the average.
Right.
Median household income doesn't take into account number of workers. So if you have a house with 8 people in it and 5 of them are working, well, your median household income is still $80,000.
Right.
They're all working minimum wage jobs. That's not 5 people at $20,000. That's an $80,000 household, which implies that the average household is worth $80,000.
Right.
We can't actually figure out because there's no metric for that. There's no way to tell because an average gets skewed up if people pay themselves too much, and the household gets skewed up because people end up having to live together because they can't afford housing.
Right. And more of them are working.
Yeah. So it's like there's no way to actually you can extrapolate and kind of get a good guess, but no one knows the exact statistics because there's nothing to measure it by.
Right.
Because the situations are just different.
Yeah.
But it's pretty obvious we're making probably about 50% is what we used to.
Mm-hmm.
On average. Obviously, the rich are actually making significantly more than they were at the time. They're, 19 to 129, I think, is the ratio, the average now.
Right.
CEO
high
pay?
Salary, yes. Yeah, it's I think I had that read something like 500 times even. But that might be just the extreme.
That might have been
it's like Jeff
specific.
Bezos or something like that.
Yeah, that might have been specific cases.
Yeah.
But, and also the fact that people being paid based on what the stock value is also kind of helped to skew that entire thing. So the stock market could be completely fake because no one cares about going through and looking at the 10-year plan. They're not going to be there in 10 years.
Right.
They're all interested in how to go through and get paid right now.
Yeah.
So it's like a lot of our companies do really silly stuff just because of the fact that they aren't going to be there when it matters, and they're not responsible to anyone but shareholders that are faceless mob. And if this faceless mob sees stocks going up, the few people that realize, hey, he's kind of selling out our future for the right now, go, oh, I should sell now. Okay.
Yeah. Man. Well, what about some hope here?
Well, the thing about it is that's the thing of beauty of history.
Mm-hmm.
You look at it in 1890. You had people that were working for literally no money. You were paid in credit at the company's store, and then they charged you more than they paid you.
Right.
So you literally could not quit. You could not make money. It was basically debt slavery.
Unless you were willing to risk just going hungry and hitchhiking.
Even then, a lot of times, as a law, they could still go after you and sue you for it and try and dock your pay somewhere else.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just because it's debt. That's debt.
Right.
It was still completely legal for them to do that.
Wow.
You know, there was a time, we ended up with situations that were much worse than we are in today.
Right.
As much as I like to point out the things that are like, hey, there's problems.
Right.
We have much worse problems. Right. We're not at the point of like the Civil War where we have to go through and fight for the freedom of black people. Like that's not the scenario we're in.
Right.
Honestly,
definitely times are better now. I mean, there are some authors that just point out that that definitely things are better now than the past in terms of just because of deflationary effects of technology and stuff. You just having a cell phone is just so much a smartphone, I should say. Actually, it's just better than the past.
A microwave used to cost $500.
Right.
Now it's $20.
Right.
We have some things going for us. The fact that we're paid half as much, a lot of stuff skews down. So we're not actually as far down. Like we're not. Our quality of life is not that much worse.
That's right.
We also spend more on vacations than they did back then.
That's true. More people can travel so much more easily.
More money goes towards entertainment than they did back then. We have a lot of things that go through
disposable income. Yeah.
Even from the 1950s one. Like it's also, it's another fun fact that no one talks about for the 1950s. Average home size was 1,000 square feet.
Oh wow, just a lot smaller home back then.
Just smaller houses. I'm like, yeah, you can afford a 1,000 square foot house with a wife and a kid. On one person's salary becomes much more believable all of a sudden when you realize they're not living in a 3-bedroom house. They're in a little, 1 or 2 bedroom place, and that's it. It's like, once you kind of start breaking things down, it starts becoming, it's not nearly as dreadful as it actually looks.
Right.
There's things that are wrong, but we've overcome more. We've done better. All it takes is a few people to realize, what? Maybe instead I'm going to go do something about it.
Right.
And, someone like AOC who just stepped up and she's like, I'm going to go through and call all of my coworkers corrupt to their face on national television. But you know what that does? It goes, you know what? Maybe I should get into politics.
Right.
And you know what? I'm probably not the only one that saw her call everyone on every one of her colleagues corrupt and gone, yeah, I totally agree with what she's saying. They pretty much are. And looking at it and going, yeah, I can get behind your statement. Maybe I should do something about it. If you know the government's corrupt, why do we have a 30% approval rating?
Right.
You're electing somebody.
Yeah.
The majority of us are electing. Most people vote. How do we have a 30% approval rating? Is it that our opinions are so horribly misinformed that we're electing terrible people? I mean, my old system used to be just vote against the incumbent. I wouldn't even do any research. I just voted against the incumbent as a general rule of, yeah, whatever, change is good.
Change is good.
That was because the thing is I didn't do the research, but I'd rather go through and just vote against. I'd rather vote for change than anything else because I hated our Congress. I hated the Senate. So I'm like, I don't know what their actual voting policy is, but I hate them, so I will rather vote change who it is.
Yeah.
Because if enough people do that, we might accidentally get changed by somebody that mattered. And it's like, that's, for the record, I do not recommend that system. It is not a good voting system. You should know who you should know who your city councilman is. You should know who your representative are in your state, who it is in Congress. You know the president. You should know the other 4 people that, it's not that hard.
Right.
2 more people out of each form of government to at least go through and pay attention to what they're saying to go, oh, like my local senator, I'm like, oh, I hate you. Yeah, you're left, but you care about everything that I don't care about. Everything you care about, none of it. Let me look at all the bills you proposed. Oh, National Awareness Week, National Awareness Week, National Awareness Week. I'm like, you actually aren't doing anything. You're just in here like, I'm going to spread the good word. I'm like, I could definitely see running against you in some 2 to 4 years or whatever. Like I could definitely see, like, it was some other people I looked at, I'm like, that would be harder to fight. But I'm like, your policies are dumb, and I hate everything I hate that you're in Congress. Because it's like, it's not that you're not doing anything. It's not that I disagree with what you're doing. It's just it doesn't matter. It's like the building's on fire, and you're like, I don't think anyone's watered the plants today. All right, there we go. Well, these plants are looking much better. And you're like, and that's kind of how I feel like the government is these days. I feel like much more it's on fire.
Sure.
But that's not where you go, well, guess everything's screwed. I'm going to go have a beer and watch it burn to the ground. That's when you go through and decide to start becoming interested. That's why I'm looking at going through and jumping on somebody's campaign to go through and see.
Yeah.
Let's find out the legwork involved in this. Maybe I wouldn't actually want to be a politician. Maybe I do better as an aide somewhere.
Right.
More, maybe I don't want to have to be the face, but maybe I can help write bills or go through and just get that.
Become that trusted advisor.
Be the trusted advisor. Be the key.
Right.
That might be a better role for me because I don't necessarily like talking to lots of people. I mean, except for this one, obviously. All of you people I love talking to.
Hey. I want to ask you a more personal question, which is,
sure.
Why do you think you gravitated towards being interested in history and politics? What about your upbringing? Were there any voices or influences of people around you in your life that kind of steered you that direction? Or you just think you found it all on your own, I'm
a unique case because you like to hear about people's stories like Elon Musk loves to tell his, of how he came from nothing and it didn't get a college degree, even though he went to Stanford and met his contacts that he needed to start PayPal there, and through his contacts in PayPal got an investor to go through and start his company, and literally all of it is bullshit. It's like, yeah, he didn't go through and get his education there, but it's not the education that matters from the degree, it's the contacts.
The networking, yeah.
And that's exactly what he did. So he likes to go through and tell his rags from riches story, even though his dad was a, multi-millionaire and that disowned him at one point.
He was well off, for sure, yeah.
He got disowned at one point. He was on his own to a point,
okay.
But it's like, that's still not a rag to riches. He had every opportunity when he started and he took advantage of it, which is good for him.
Right.
But, I did not. I did not start with, most of my education is actually, I have holes in it because most of it I was self-taught. I went through and found history as a love on my own because you can use it to predict the future.
Sure.
Most of the mistakes, if you look at what we did in the past and you went, yeah, that was terrible. Then you look at it in the future and someone does the same thing, you're like, probably going to be the same thing is going to happen. And sure enough, it does.
Yeah.
You look at, and it's very easy, and it's very easy to prove. You look at history like, oh, they killed, I don't know, Saddam Hussein as an example. And you're like, oh, he was he's an evil dictator. And I'm like, okay, so we're killing the evil dictator. Okay, and then we're leaving. Is that the plan? No, we're going to just leave our military bases, but we're going to then set up a puppet ruler, but not give them the powers that's going to be its own democracy. I'm like, so you're removing the dictator, but not really instilling a new one or establishing it as a territory or conquering anything. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, have you ever heard of what happens when you kill the leader of a tribe? Through any of history, we have thousands of years of kill this leader of the tribe. Yeah, they all just end up having a power vacuum and kill each other, and then you just end up with chaos. It's like, yeah. They're like, so you want chaos? They're like, you can't say that out loud. I'm like, okay, fine. Well, I guess that's the plan. Well, like anyone should know that, but no, it was like, no, we were surprised that it all went badly. We were surprised when we overthrew the Taliban and it all went badly. We were surprised. I'm like, the government is either the most incompetent or they just lie about it. And I like to hope that they're just lying, because sometimes you have to believe that the government is as incompetent as it comes across in the word what they say. I'm like, I kind of just hope they're evil and just got some part that, some part of them are still going to at least look out for me, because it's really hard if they're just this incompetent to have any faith that it can get better. If they're evil, you can get rid of evil people. You can kill them.
You can
steal a different direction. You can, But if they're all just terrible, I'm like, I really, really hope that part isn't true. Like, I hope that there's some part of me that goes, I kind of hope the conspiracy theorists are a little right at least. We didn't know. Like, how did you not know? I was sitting here. I read a history book when I was from 3rd grade, and it told me what would happen. How are you confused?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cool. That's interesting. So, no,
So, sorry,
Yeah.
to finish
Yeah.
your actual question,
Yeah.
because I did tirade it. Most of my knowledge was self-taught. I grabbed a world book at one point and then read them all. Then
Wow.
I just read the entire world book series. Skipping some stuff.
Sure.
But for the most part, it started off
Those
with
are
me-
encyclopedias.
Yeah, it was an old encyclopedia back before we had the internet.
Yeah.
And I would go through and I looked up something and then it would tell me about some other point in history. And then I'd look that up and that was cool. And then it would talk about something else because that's how history works. There's always a before and there's always an after. So whenever I read about some major event, it would reference something else. And it just got me into these, it's funny because it's the YouTube holes of today, but that's where I started was just getting lost in the holes of finding just different pieces of history that were fascinating.
Yeah.
Learning about different kings and how they approached things. But the funny thing is because there was no teacher, it was years before I got any good at names. And it wasn't great at establishing dates either because that wasn't the important thing. It was the story of it. So it's taken me many years down the road to go through and go, oh, that's who that was. Because I knew the story, I just didn't know who it was or when it was, or not even necessarily where it was. I just wanted to learn about these people and what they did.
Sure.
But they're dead now. Why do we care about what their name is? I'm like, oh, if you want to talk to other people about it, you kind of need to know who they are. I'm like, it's a fair point. I didn't really think about that when I was younger. I would just thought, cool story, next story, cool story. Oh, that's a messed up story. That shit should never have happened. Okay, what else happened in these? And that's really where my love of it came in, but also that was where my love of learning came in. Most of my education, I never got it. I did one semester when I was 15 years old of City College because I got my high school diploma at 15 and went through, did one semester of it, felt that was interesting, but I kind of need to get a job. And then I went and got a job.
And you right away just started working.
Yeah, I've had a job almost nonstop since I was 16.
Wow.
That's why I can go through. I'm like, I've been at my current job for 8 years, but even before that, I'm like, yeah, I've done. You want to talk shitty jobs? I've done them all. I've done a lot of them at least.
And why was it so imperative that you needed to get a job?
My family wasn't going to pay my way for anything, so I had to go through and pay my own way, and I also felt like I needed experience. The sooner you started in life, the more likely you are to be successful, the more opportunities you'll have.
And that's something that you discover on your own, or is that
that
was
how I was pushed.
That was your push.
That was how my family pushed me. My family was not particularly well educated.
Sure.
So a drive towards higher education was never really encouraged.
Sure.
And which is kind of a shame because I was always a bright kid. I feel like I don't know.
You probably could have become a PhD scientist.
I probably could have been a PhD scientist or a great lawyer because I love to argue, but then I just never got pushed in that direction. So I ended up with just get a job
and work, right,
and see how it goes.
Yeah.
And which is
it's fine.
It's fine. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
I never would have learned the experience I have from working in sales, from working in finance. Like I wanted to run a business, so I learned that the best ways to run a finance in business is to run from sales or financial background. Either make so much money it doesn't matter that you waste some, or spend your money efficiently so that you can go through and maximize your opportunity.
Right.
So I decided to learn both of them because I thought of running a business one day would be nice. So I learned sales and I learned finance.
Sure.
But then when it came into looking around me at the entrepreneurs I knew, I'm like, these people work themselves to death.
Sure.
For a few bucks. Like these people aren't living lives where they get to enjoy the wealth they have.
Right.
My mom was one of those, Sarah. She ran her own small business and she worked till 10 o'clock at night most nights.
Yeah.
And I looked at that and went, originally I was like, yeah, that's what my mom did. I want to go through and start my own small business. I'm going to be a success. But then I looked up to her. I looked up to her. And then, but later on in life when I looked at it, it was, a few more, after I went through a few more owners, especially shitty owners, like where I worked for shitty bosses that were literally just in it for the dollar.
Yeah.
And I went, especially working from finance, like finance and sales, you both see how much money's coming in.
Right.
You know how honest and how corrupt these people are. And when I worked at a business where the owner was taking 50% of the net.
Okay.
As 50% of the money that came in the door went to their personal.
50%.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
And we had to run the company and grow the company off the other half. And I'm like, I want to run your company. Like, I want to help you run your company and stuff, but this is just not a company I want to work for. After a while, I'm like, I'm less impressed with, looking at it. And I saw the two extremes. It was either the person that worked themselves to death or the person that did no work.
Right. Sure.
that's what I think. I didn't see a lot of business owners that were in between.
Right.
My most recent job, I found one that, no, he works himself to death, but he does care.
Sure.
But that's really seems like the two type of people. It's either the guy that's all in and he's just playing the game of making businesses or making a business, and the person that's trying to get enough money so they can get out of working.
Right. Just get a system established and then just let it run itself and live off of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
and I'm like, and that's always where I'm like, you know, when you look at the laws, I'm like, which of these guys should you help and which one should you hurt? Because I don't think these should be treated the same.
Sure.
You know, the guy that goes through and is busting his ass, I'm like, what can we do to help the guy that really is trying to grow a company? And then who's the one that's trying to go through and go, how much money can I rip off the top?
Yeah.
Because, you know, and that comes back to that wage inequality thing. 19 times, you should be good enough.
Right.
And you can do that either way. You pay all your company, your employees, $100,000 a year. You take $1.9 million. I'm fine with that system.
Right.
That's still fair with me.
Right.
You know, as long as everyone's getting a fair cut of the, pay, that I'm cool with that. That's,
right.
But it's that someone that was willing to do that, and someone that's willing to go through and approach, capitalism that way, which used to be more common. The current company I work for does. I don't know if it's how fair on, I don't know the actual percentages. I have no idea what the owner makes, but at least the companies feel like the employees I talk to feel like they're well compensated.
Right.
And that's the thing I feel like it's missing from every other job I've ever been at ever. Is everyone feels that they're not compensated enough. And
right.
me, I'm like, I'm well compensated. It's nice.
Yeah.
And it's weird to being so left on my viewpoints, because the thing is I've never really received anything from the government.
Sure.
I didn't go to public school. I went to private school.
Right.
So I never got that. I've never needed the police. Well, when I've needed them, they've never been there to be able to help me. So that came up in our previous conversations. But, the police has never been a valuable service. I've never needed the fire department. So in reality, the government goes through and takes money from me, but doesn't provide much of a service outside of roads.
Sure.
But that's local.
And parks.
But I don't go to the park very often, so that's less. But I don't drive all that much. And
Sure.
in reality, when it comes down to it, compared to the amount of money they take from me, the service they provide is very low.
Sure.
But you know what? Once you get to a point where you make enough that you're happy, it doesn't matter so much.
Sure.
It just doesn't. The fact that I go through and I make more money, I make enough money that I can buy anything I want. Sure, the government takes an unfair piece out of it compared to what I receive, but I'm like, that's fine.
Yeah.
Now, if it's going into one guy's pocket or 20 guys' pockets, that's a different story.
Right.
I'm against corruption, but if that goes through and one kid is able to go through and pick up a school book and figure out, that he can go through and become a success in his life and turn into a lawyer because that helped in one grant or something else.
Right.
Some other program where it actually, made a difference in somebody's life, then it's worth it.
Sure.
Because it's not costing me my quality of life.
Right. Right.
You know?
Or the fire department does go out and put somebody else's
And it puts
house
somebody
out.
else's house out. That's also fine. That saves somebody's life. Or it's
Right.
those things. There's a value there.
Right.
And, people love to argue against, taxation is theft. And I'm like, I don't care about that battle anymore. I just don't. That battle is so, and it's funny because it's very rarely the middle and upper middle class. It's like, the low rich and the upper middle class are the guys that tend to get to the point where they're like, I'm good.
Right.
I've got what I need. I am good.
Right.
I'm fine with the status quo.
Right.
But the ultra rich are like, how do I get out of every dollar possible?
Right.
Trump is president of the United States where he knows his tax returns will be public information. He pays $750.
Yeah.
He pays like a quarter of what I do. I'm like, come on, dude.
Yeah.
You pay a quarter, you pay less than a lot of McDonald's workers do.
Yeah.
Like, how blatant don't be so goddamn blatant about it. Like, it's not a good thing to cheat the government out of money. Stop promoting that it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
it does get to that point where it's interesting where you can see a lot of people that are struggling and they have that feeling taxation is theft. And then you see the ultra rich that maybe would feel that way too, because they're only gotten to that point because they're just on this greed mission to some extent, because it's never enough, or else they'd have other interests, and they would be spending their time differently. But they are just spending every minute of their life trying to maximize their money as well as avoid paying taxes and keep it and preserve it, right? And versus, I think a majority of people don't find happiness through that level amount of greed. But once you're able to kind of comfortably able to buy the things you want to have within reason, and have shelter and have a family and have, love, etc., you don't need, you're okay with some taxes if it's going to help out society be a safer, tranquil, happier place.
Yeah, because
and a good friend of mine, he still feels the whole taxation is theft thing, but I feel like he's on that transition because he also grew up in hard times, and money was tight, and he didn't get to go to college and had to go straight into working, and he worked a lot of shitty jobs, and now he's got a better job, and he works for Tesla, and he gets stock options, and he actually makes good money, and his life is getting improved. And I'm seeing he's not quite where you're at yet,
sure,
but I'm seeing the slight tick happening, and that's really interesting how that happens, And
it's weird. It's really weird because it's like you get it. It seems like a lot of people trend that way once they kind of get more financially successful. But the funny thing is it's the viewpoint of when you don't have money, and then the government is taking a bunch of money from you and doesn't give you anything for it. That's where you end up with why you end up with these rural Republicans.
Sure.
Is because they don't receive the benefits of their taxes.
Right.
And that's why rural areas are red and cities are blue. Is a lot of the tax money goes to cities and not a lot of it goes to rural areas.
Right.
So you end up with this weird dichotomy where it's like, yeah, I don't believe in taxes, so to hell with taxes. And then you have this rural area, and then you have the ultra rich, and it's like it's this weird thing of like, yeah, that guy's trying to screw you over though, right? Like the guy at the very top normally wants to affect the poorest people. That's normally the easiest people to take advantage of. That's where, and it's always a weird system on how the middle ends up one way and the extremes end up the other. And I'm like, how do you guys know each other?
I know, exactly. Yeah. I actually am a little optimistic in, Biden's got this huge package that's kicking in. It's going to be a big infrastructure bill. But one part that is particularly of interest to me is that there's a big push, I forget how many billions being allocated, but to get high-speed broadband internet across the whole U.S., wherever you are, that all the rural areas, and that would obviously that would mostly benefit the rural areas. And I wonder if that would shift their perspective that oh wow, there's actually something coming my way, because I know how frustrating it is being out in Michigan in the middle of nowhere for at a cabin, and it's oh, there's no internet. Wow. And it's what do you guys have here? Oh, if you pay for it, you can get satellite, which is crap, and it's super expensive. And it's so these people just opt to not have internet then, and it's they're kind of getting left out. But if maybe they feel a little differently if they got high speed internet, I don't know.
Oh, and for the one other thing to give you hope.
Yeah.
So if you think about, you're like, yeah, our books have gotten dumber. Well, remember, 150 years ago, it is any time that you're at home and it's not a Friday night specifically where you can go down to the pub in town and you have to work. The only thing you have to do is read.
Sure. Yeah.
That's literally all of your entertainment. So that's one of the reasons that vocabularies have gotten shorter. Is we don't have to.
Right.
We just don't have to be quite as elaborate in our words as it is. You were talking about the rural area and lack of internet, and just reminded me of that. I'm like, oh yeah, that was the counter to that, which is I listened to Hamilton, and I'm like, God, I would probably read a lot if I didn't have things that entertain me and have distractions and do these other things. It's yeah, whatever. Still choosing the internet over it.
Yeah. It is interesting. I do think though the difference now is that there's way too many distractions now. That's kind of probably our biggest problem in modern society is it's distraction central, and people, it's so easy to get unfocused on what you want to do because you got distracted, and now people feel aimless and purposeless because they weren't bored. Because there is actually value in boredom. Because when you're bored, you sit there and you think about what you want because you're bored. And the harder you think about what you want because you're bored, the more you start to formulate a plan to get the thing that you want. And now you have a strategy.
See, it's not, I don't think it's actually boredom. It's time to turn your mind off, is what it is.
Okay.
It's when you're it's when you're not going through and intake. Like, the problem is right now we just have a lot of intaking of information. You watch all these things, you listen to all this stuff. But, practical hobbies have been something I've always supported. I've always supported, I like to paint miniatures, or I go out and meet with people and discuss things, or I go over and deal with board games. But I've always been a guy with a lot of hobbies that keep me busy.
Sure.
And I'm also the person that literally has to go out of my way to not pick up new hobbies. Like, I watched, Forged in Fire, and I'm like, I really want to go through and build a smith right now. And I'm like, no, Arthur, stop trying to buy smithing tools online.
Or did you see the glass blowing show?
I saw the glass blowing show,
so
too.
Cool.
Like,
so cool.
But I'm the type of person that would just go, that's cool. I want to learn how to do that. I'm just going to do that now.
Yeah.
I can do basic carpentry. I do all of the maintenance on my house.
Yeah.
I have to go replace my sink probably tomorrow night. I should have done it tonight, but I did this instead, because I don't want to. And you got to take time for interesting things that are different.
Yeah.
And this is definitely different.
Yeah.
But, it's like, I've always been the type, but it's that time when you're not doing, when you're doing something different, where you're just like going through and painting something, or using a saw, or going through and doing something that's different that lets you not be so plugged into everything else. It gives you the same effect of being bored, but it's not quite boredom. It's a little bit, you get a little bit of activity. It's like
a little flow state.
Like jogging in general. Like, you're bored, you can be bored jogging, or you can be listening to something. But if you're not listening to anything, you end up with this weird, you're active, you're not bored necessarily, but you're also not bored. It's this weird in-between stage where you're kind of just thinking.
Yeah.
And that's like, I feel like that's the problem, is people just don't think anymore. Like, there's just less thinking because you don't need to. You can go through, pull up a video game, pull up a movie, pull up a show, just grab anything that grabs your attention.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm like, no, that's great. I do all of those things. I'm not saying they're bad. But also take some time for other hobbies.
Right.
Go do exercise without listening to something. Go do physically strenuous stuff. Go paint something. Go cut something. Go look at how to build how did Rome build concrete?
Right.
It can't be that complicated.
Yeah.
They're Romans. We should be able to figure it out now. You want to learn how to make concrete?
Yeah. Funny story on the concrete. The Romans had that technology, and then it was lost for like 1,000+ years before, like, I want to say like 1200s or 1400s or something. Russia. You start seeing concrete buildings appear again, but it was kind of like, it was rediscovered, but no one really knew how it kind of like just started coming back.
And our current concrete isn't
different.
Good.
Yeah, it's not the same as the Roman concrete, because the Pantheon is still like pristine and looks amazing. Like, Jesus, what was in that recipe? And it's like, And
even still, they keep, every couple of years, they discover something new that they didn't know before that was the trick to making Roman concrete. Because they did a bunch of different things, that there was a very specific art to it. And it's just one of those things that are lost for technology. But it's like, because of the materials they had on hand, it gives them advantages. But also, like, the last thing I read on is they use pig's blood instead of water to mix their concrete.
Whoa.
And you're like, what? And it's like, and the way they figured that out is because there is iron in the concrete. And the theory is that it was from pig's blood that was mixed into the concrete. Now, I haven't known anyone to go through and do
it's like
pig's
a thickener or something,
But the problem is also over time, the chemical components of concrete
break
change.
down and change. So you can't actually
just
know
for sure. It's just a theory. So we have to go through and have someone make a new concrete thing with pig's blood, and then let it sit around for 1,000 years to see if it compares.
Yeah. I actually did a research paper in college about, which seems a little conspiracy-esque, but there's some geologist folks that made that mimicked. They know how to make a recipe to mimic a pyramid block as being a form, and then pouring it and making a sandstone block, basically.
Okay.
And then it's a different recipe because you use lye and sand, and then that actually has a chemical reaction, and then you get sandstone, basically. And the Egyptians had both because they were using lye to wash their clothes and stuff like that, and they had plenty of sand.
Sure.
So, and so this is a particular French geologist theory, and he's done a lot of experiments where he's made these blocks and then handed them over to a geologist and said, hey, tell me how old that block is, as if you're checking the age of an Egyptian block. And they're like, yeah, it's about 4,000 years old. He's like, I just made it yesterday. Gotcha. So interesting side note on that a theory, because again, they still can't 100% prove whether or not they cut the blocks and then they dragged them and blah, and they're like, these would weigh tons. How many slaves or camels would you need to pull these things? And okay, you had ramps, but it's all just still a theory.
And it's all a theory.
Yeah, it's all a theory.
But that's what I love about science. And that's one of the things that angers me the most about people that argue science. And I'm like, at least science knows that they can be wrong.
Right.
That's the important part.
They're always open to being proven wrong.
It's only true until it's not.
Right.
The Earth was the center of the universe until it wasn't anymore. But we know that now. And we acknowledge that things could be wrong. And I love that about the science community.
Yeah.
Like, as a fundamental thing. And I love when stupid people go, well, it's only a theory. And I'm like, it's only a fact until it's proven wrong. It is still a fact. It is just a fact until proven wrong. But they know that. So they call it a theory. You're too dumb to understand it, though. Why am I still arguing with you? Damn it, I'm going back to, I'm going back to Bill Murray's quote on this, which is, it's hard to win an argument against a smart person. It's impossible to win one against a stupid one.
Yeah.
I'm like, damn it, why am I still doing this?
I know. That's why sometimes, I say, why are you doing this on Facebook? You're engaging with people that I feel like there's no hope for, or that they're just so resolute in their ideas, but yeah.
But the thing is I was too back in the day.
Sure.
I knew that, that Republican viewpoint, that capitalism was the right thing. Mm-hmm. Because really smart people that are much smarter than me believed in it. Mm. And I didn't know anything else. And I didn't know the history that said, oh, we tried this already. Yeah, they had capitalism in the 1600s. It led to slavery. Okay, maybe not letting free market capital. We got to have some rules.
Right.
Like, okay, well, we got rid of slavery as a rule. So, And they're like, okay. Then they figured out how to make slavery, but just not call it slavery. Right, You're like, hey, wait a minute. We learned from that one. All right, now we're going to put in a minimum wage. And then people are like, get rid of the minimum wage. I'm like, wait a minute. There's a reason we did this. It's because if you don't have a minimum wage, you get slavery. Can we avoid slavery, please? Like, that's all I want. Like, I would like to, I'd like people to go through and get paid a fair amount of work compared to the people who are higher up in the company. Relative to their contribution to the company and, the value that they're there and how difficult it would be to replace them. Right. That's all. And, people lower on the food chain are going to get less money. That's fair, too. It's not every man should deserve the same. It's every man deserves what they're worth.
Right.
Yeah.
And I imagine part of the reason that you, like you said, you used to be a thought that you had all the answers. But then I imagine at some point, like you said, you had a coworker that started challenging you on those things. And that's where a shift started to happen a little bit.
Well, it shifts so, it was, once again, it's a slow thing. But
right.
It's more when you try and, when you take these facts, it's like, and a lot of it was also just my own financial success was a big factor.
Right.
When you were sitting there going, the government doesn't do anything to help people, because it hasn't done anything to help me.
Right.
I did not grow up particularly wealthy. I did not, my first television that I remember was 4 inches.
Wow.
And black and white.
Wow.
I am not that old.
You're not that old. Yeah,
that is not a normal TV for my age range. That was a real bad, real cheap TV, even then.
Wow.
That was way too old for its time, So, that's one of the things is when you look at this stuff, I'm like, a lot of my own personal experiences went through and said, I didn't go to public school. Why do we need, I challenged public schools when I was younger. Why do we even need them?
Right.
I did it without it.
Right.
Why not just leave it to being a free market system for education? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, I read more history. I realized why these are what happens when you don't have public schools. You end up with really uneducated people. Okay. And then I see systems now where I'm like, oh, we have public schools, but they don't have a point anymore. And so now we still have really uneducated people. Now, I personally have gained a lot more hope in humanity and hope in government systems. Because the thing is, you have to either hope that there's a way to fix it or give up on society. Like, it's either anarchy or have hope that people can work together and come up with a plan for the betterment of us.
Right, right.
Because those are your only real two systems. It's like, do you like Mad Max or people?
Right, right. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well.
And the problem with the anarchy solution works when you're younger and alone, but then once you have kids or a family, you go, that doesn't seem like a good option anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, it's like, I supported local government. That was always my bigger stance, is that any government can work as long as it's small enough.
Sure.
You know, people argue communism. I'm like, every family is a communism.
Right.
It just is by definition. The children don't work and they eat for free.
Right.
You know, everyone's working for the betterment of others in theory, except for the children, because they're children. But you know, that is an example of how communism is. The Catholic Church is not quite a communism, but it's pretty close. You know, the people aren't doing it for the money. Most of the time they are. You're not doing it for your paycheck. Everyone works together. Everyone tries to share. That's communism.
Right.
It's been around for hundreds of years. You know, people like to bring up the USSR one. I'm like, look, that's an example, sure, but that's like the English slavery thing. It's just different. But, you know, that's the whole point, is it comes into this education piece of what's the value that comes from it. We spend millions of dollars on education. Are people today more educated than they were before we started having public schools? And I'm like, that's a hard decision. That's hard. That's surprisingly difficult. And that kind of makes me sad a little bit. But I don't, you know, it's like, I'm not sure, because they had what was important to be educated in was different.
Was different then, right.
So you can't really judge the same things.
Right. The value of knowledge, you know, there's not really much value of like knowing how to milk a cow anymore. That was knowledge that was important, because 80% of families were farmers.
Yeah, and they had the knowledge to do their trade.
Right.
And everything else, like, they know how to do their job. They know how to go through and have a good time. What else do I need to know?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, politics. And you're like, look, no one comes out here. I don't go into town. It's not a problem.
Right.
Every once in a while, we'll look at Jim. He's going to go through and vote for my behalf. He's read way more books and he likes that shit. I don't care. And it's like, okay, that's a fair way of approaching it. And it worked. But then you're like, looking at, you know, then you're like, well, let's look at the schools from back then. Well, the people that did go to school were very well educated, because those are wealthy families that put the time and energy into their education system. So those school systems are very good,
right,
comparatively. Like the average educated person then versus the average educated person now, then is vastly higher, because that's like looking at only the top 1% of our classes today, because only 1% went to school then.
Sure. And
then all of a sudden things start to even out again. It's just interesting, because it's like it's one of those things where I love looking into this stuff and debating it, because there's no easy answer.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just like, it gives us a question, which is why I'm like, I just wish we could answer when we were wrong, because we need to try stuff, we need to change stuff, we need to do more.
Yeah.
But we also need to go, oh, that was a bad idea. It looked good on paper. You know, No Child Left Behind was a great system on paper. Yeah, we're going to make everyone follow a standardized testing system. And then you're like, oh, well, this school district does worse with standardized testing. And like, well, they just kicked out all the kids that did bad at school. There we go. Their grades are up now, so they get more government money. I'm like, I didn't foresee that coming. You know, when I read about it, I heard about it in the news beforehand. I didn't expect schools to go through and expel their dumbest students. But that happened. Yeah. And it's one of those things that goes, oh, yeah, duh. I probably should have thought people would do that, because people are generally want more money to be more successful, and they're like, the more money they get, the better the education they have, so they don't have to kick out as many schools next year, or students next year, and it's like, it becomes a weird bar, but it's like, but you know, that I feel like that kind of got dropped, and that was kind of acknowledged as a mistake, and that's not really held up. People don't consider it a good thing anymore because it didn't work. Right. Yeah. And I feel like that's one of the nice cases where we go, oh, that didn't work. Yeah. You know? But the more as time goes by, we need to just acknowledge when systems don't work and replace them with better ones. Yeah. You know, the college one, I'm like, free college for everyone. I'm like, well, if they're going to take free classes and studies in social studies, which is, you know, might be valuable as being an educated person, but might not be useful in getting a job outside of being a teacher of social studies, that might be, it's like, is that what government should be supporting?
Funding, right.
Right. I support education in social studies. I love history, and I feel like you need a good history foundation, but the point I'm at, I'm way past that.
Right.
I might still go back to college just to study history for the fun of studying history.
Sure.
Because why not? It would be a cool thing to go through and see how does my self-taught education hold up against an actual school's curriculum?
Sure, yeah.
Do I know more than the instructors in certain areas? Am I just missing some fascinating piece of history? Or is it just going to be a waste of my time?
Right.
I kind of want to do it just to find out.
Yeah.
I walk out of it and go, oh, yeah, no, I knew all that. That was an easy-ass class.
Well, especially probably the lower level ones, yeah.
Probably the lower level ones, at least for probably the first 2 years for the most part.
Right. But maybe there's some way you can try to just jump into a higher level class. I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea. I don't, and it's one of those things where it'd be kind of interesting to check out. Yeah. But I'm like, is that something that I feel like the government should pay for? No. The government shouldn't pay for me to go through it and enjoy my hobby. Right. That is my hobby. It's not, that's not helping me survive. It's me enjoying myself. And that's the thing with we have government-backed loans that help people enjoy themselves and go to, because a lot of people go to college for the experience.
Sure.
And that's also changed how colleges work. Colleges are no longer about which colleges have the best education. A large amount of their colleges are about what services are provided or how cool is the campus or what is there. That our whole system is yeah, I'm okay with that aspect and it working that way, but the government shouldn't pay for that.
Sure.
That shouldn't be what that's not the government's job. The government's job is supposed to be preparing you for an education so you can enter the workforce. If you want to argue for higher education, that's fine.
Right.
But that's not what you're doing. You're not doing that. So why are you going into debt? Why is the government encouraging you to go into debt over something that is, not helping anyone other than unless they're trying to make debt slaves, which, God, I hope that's not the case, and it's just the system's gotten corrupt. Because, that's also one of the problems. I know a lot of very right-wing people, but they have the bleakest view of anyone. And that's one of the reasons why
it's all evil intent.
It's all just, the world is out to get you.
Right.
And we have to stand against them. That's why they're so strong on the Second Amendment, because the world is out to get them.
Right.
And I'm like, that's such a disappointing view of humanity. Because those guys won't run for office. If the game's rigged, you won't play. They won't vote because the game's rigged. Then they end up with this very extreme viewpoints because they don't see any that it's too late, that the game's already lost.
Right.
And that's kind of well, you think the game's rigged, I kind of want to go prove you wrong now.
Right.
I want to get into politics and try and prove somebody wrong. And I'm I don't know how long it's going to take, and maybe it will be, 2 years, 4 years. I think the earliest it would be realistically is 4 years, because I think I want to work on somebody's campaign, and then it'll be another 2-year cycle before that.
Right.
And it'd still take a bit to get into anything, national, unless I decide to cheat my way into it and go move somewhere easy.
Right.
I'm yeah, you want to be a state senator in my local senate? I'm okay, I live in LA, so that is, I have to get elected by a person that has 400,000 people. I'm what's the population of New Hampshire? 400,000 people. I'm I can go be governor for the same amount of work. They might pay a little bit more attention, so it's a little bit harder.
Sure.
But not that much harder. The last election there, you had 100,000 voters. How many did New Hampshire have? I don't know. Probably 200,000. It's probably twice as much work, but I go from a local senator running the damn place. It's a big difference in it. Or running for the actual Senate, and then I only need 200,000.
Or you just pull an Andrew Yang, you run for president, then when you don't make it, then you run and become he's going to become mayor of New York City, most likely. Is what is happening here, projection-wise.
Yeah.
You go big, intentionally lose, but you get
your name out.
Get your name out there, and then you go for something more.
Well, I wanted to be president when I was a teenager. I figured out how I was going to do it too, as I was going to sue on the behalf of age discrimination for being too young. Since the Constitution lists 35. Get name recognition, then go into politics locally.
There you go.
But then I needed to work a real job, and I lost interest when I was in my 20s. It was just too much other stuff.
You thought about this?
I thought
earlier.
About this when I was a kid. Yeah.
Wow.
But at the time I was very much one of the running. I loved history from like 13, I was deep into history. So when you're deep into history, what are you reading? If you're choosing to read, you're reading about leaders and rulers and people running things. So
Sure.
at that point, I'm like, yeah, well, I'm going to learn how to do this. I'm going to do it myself. And then I'm like, well, that plan didn't pan out, but I still learned a lot of cool history stuff. And then I'm like, I didn't know history. Now I feel like I should go be president again.
Yeah.
Maybe not that hard. That seems like a lot of responsibility, and that seems exhausting and very, very hard to accomplish. But maybe I can go local.
Yeah.
Go make some difference. Because the thing is like, a lot of the change starts local anyway.
It does, yeah.
We need to change how our election system works. Well, why don't we start with California?
Sure.
Like, you want to go through and argue about healthcare? I'm like, there's nothing stopping California from doing that.
Sure.
We could have universal healthcare.
Right. There definitely should be enough. I mean, we're the 5th largest GDP as a country.
Yeah.
If we ranked us as a country. So it makes them, like, because you'll hear the argument like, oh, well, we can't do it alone because we need the backing of the federal government funding. But I'm pretty sure we have more than enough money to make it happen on our own.
If we can't, that means we're corrupt.
That means we're corrupt
and
if we
we
can't.
need to find out who the hell it is and
taking
arrest
the money.
them.
Right.
And then we can pay for it.
Yeah.
Because that's all that means. I mean, if we're the 5th, I know China's number 2, that means we don't have to go very far down the list till we hit 1. We're like, all right, France, do we beat them? Probably. Don't probably lose to Germany, probably beat France, probably beat every other country in Europe. I'm like, okay, well, France probably has a comparable population to us.
Right.
So that's going to be an easier argument. I'm like, I'm pretty sure Australia also has free healthcare. Let's see, it doesn't take very long for us to find an easy comparison to go, yeah, we're doing it.
It's possible. Right.
Yeah. It's like there's just enough data, there's enough things. I'm like, but if we're the 5th largest economy in the world, I'm like, come on. If first past the voting doesn't work and isn't a good system, and they have better systems proven in other countries right now.
Yeah.
Like, as a recommendation, I would say to anyone that gets a time, feels interested in elections, Australia actively has done the thing I've been complaining about, where they try something, see it fail, try something else, to try and get the best election system.
Interesting.
That is actually a hobby of theirs, that as a country, they have been working to try and find the best system consistently. And it's really impressive. I was thinking they're trying to figure it out.
I've only heard good things about Australia. I mean, my cousin went there for 9 months, and he'd never worked construction in his life. He was getting paid $28 an hour to work construction. The wages are really high there.
And I'm like, I'm not even going to argue their left-right political system.
Sure.
It's just that as a country, it tries to figure, because it went through, I was like, looking at first past the post, which is our election system, and then I was looking at the ranked voting.
So they do ranked choice voting there, do they?
They did.
Oh,
They've already done that.
And they decided
and went past it to another version that is a better version than ranked voting.
Really?
Yeah, they were already have tried that, seen the problems with it, and moved on.
And the problems they found was just that everyone's C choice is what got picked or whatever.
What happened was when you started running into ranked voting, it ended up with everybody's number 2 was the popular candidate.
Right, so then the popular candidate just ends up winning anyway.
So it ended up actually being worse for third-party candidates because they didn't capture enough of the number 2 or number 3 slots
to steal votes.
To be able to steal votes. So they basically got, hey, we're here, and then their votes went back into the main election.
Right.
So it helped a little bit in the category of
primaries or
of going through and getting it, at least the Democrat and Republican count being right, or the left and right count being counted, because you at least had your backup, and at least your vote went to your backup as opposed to not counted.
Right.
So it was still better than our system.
It feels better as a voter.
Yeah, but they went past it. I don't remember what the next system was after that they moved to, but they moved to another system after that to try and get third parties to be represented. Because if you think about it, every year there's 1 million votes that go to third-party candidates.
Sure.
There is 0 listed third-party senators and 0 listed. I think there might be one. Green.
In Congress, I think there's a couple.
There's
non-affiliated.
There's non-affiliated. Bernie Sanders is not affiliated with the Democratic Party. He runs on the presidential ticket, which I think is hilarious. But when he runs for Congress, he doesn't list himself as a Democrat.
That's right.
Which I think is hilarious. But there's very few libertarian. There's, I don't think, any Green Party. There's no one from the other 10 parties that are listed in America. No representation of those parties at all. Yet those people do get millions of votes a year.
Sure.
And I'm like, the system, if they don't get any representation, even though they are holding, like they should mathematically get some,
Right.
but because of how our system is set up, they don't.
Oh, they must be holding more local offices though. There must be, or if those parties were smart, they would mobilize. They go, cool. Well, if we win this town council, this council, then maybe we can redraw the district map to favor us a little bit or whatever.
Well, on that argument, let's take that logic, right?
Okay.
20% of the U.S. is black.
Right. Okay.
Look at a picture of the Senate.
Sure. Right.
Look at the picture of the House.
I think the House of Representatives, it looks a little bit better, but
it's better, but it's not 20% better.
Right.
It's
No.
not. It's not representative. I think it's. I have a harder time. Sometimes I get confused on the national versus the LA because I look a lot more at LA.
LA. Okay.
And I'm like, I was about to bring up the Asian argument. I'm like, I don't remember what the Asian actually is. I know in LA it's 10%, but I do not know what the national level is. I think it's lower. I think it's in the 2 or 3% category, which is harder to do. But I'm like, there still should be, generally the idea is to try to find a system where the races would be, or at least the people's viewpoints would be represented.
Right.
Libertarians would get there, but they don't win locals because they're a national party. There's
Right.
1 million members. Well, split that across 50 states, then split it across counties, and you could end up with one person in each county.
Right.
But let's say you do that. Even once again, you split it that way, but up the number to 1 million people, or 2 million people, or 3 million people. You can still end up with no representation
Sure.
in our system.
Right.
So they were trying to solve that. They go, cool. These people got, we have how many seats in the House? 300. There's how many voters? 150 million. We got 1 million votes for them. They get 2 seats. Now let's try and figure out where those people voted so we can try and get them to do the best for, representative electoral so they can kind of represent the people. But, there's an argument against, trying to represent the people of Georgia when most of the people didn't vote for you, which happens a surprising amount. Unless they're doing the runoff system and then 51% of the people. Actually, in no election does most of the people vote for you.
Sure. Right.
Because most people don't vote.
Right.
So,
although we had the highest turnout, I think, ever in history, well, and obviously population is going up.
Yeah. But it's still,
the percentage is probably still low. Yeah.
It was still up. But it's still only, I think it was a 60% turnout, which is record high.
Right.
But in other countries, like Australia, as an example, it is a $25 fine if you do not vote.
Whoa.
Which I love. It's just enough to be annoying, but
Right.
if you really don't want to, you can.
You can pay it. Right,
you can
right.
pay it. It's not ridiculous.
Right.
But it's a $25 fine.
It's a little nudge.
It's a little nudge. And I'm like, that's the perfect thing. They ask people, like, how do you feel about the $25 fine? I'm like, I don't know. It's always been there. Just vote. Or if you really don't want it, just pay the $25. Whatever.
Right.
It's not that hard. You go in. It takes a few minutes.
Yeah.
But it was an amazing difference on a system where I'm like, it tries to represent the people.
Right.
But the thing is if you try and represent the people, you're going to make your party less powerful. And very few people are willing to go through and do that.
Yeah.
Very few people are trying to reform election things, and that can be done at the local level.
Right.
We can get rid of gerrymandering. We can get rid of representative electives. You have your city council, and then we go by party for the rest of the state.
Right.
Totally could do that.
What's interesting is New York City is doing, this is their first election that's going to be ranked choice voting.
There's, I think, 3 states that do it.
Oh, there's 3 states that do it already. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay.
I think Maryland is one, and I think there's 2 more that also do ranked choice voting already.
Okay. So maybe we'll go through that phase, and then we'll realize it didn't work, and then.
Well, the problem there's 2 big complaints with it. One is there's the argument it hurts third parties in the end, but
the system already hurts third parties.
The third party, they're already getting dicked, so it doesn't hurt them any more or less than it currently
Right.
is. The problem is trying to get it done in a way where we can easily do recounts. And if you're not using a computer to calculate it, it's a very slow system.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
That's the problem where it comes into, is like, if you're not using a computer to calculate it, well, does it make it too dependent on technology? It's not like everyone believes like Texas is, where they don't have paper ballots, even though they're the third largest, or the third highest GDP state. they have no paper records on their system. And then cry foul about the big lie, and I'm like, your state literally can't do a recount.
Yeah.
There's no way to prove that any of your elected officials got their job. It's literally impossible to prove, and you're crying about it when you passed laws that did this recently.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't understand. I still like to now claim that Texas has cheated, that all of their current elected officials lost all of their elections because they can't prove it otherwise. Every other state of the union can. There's a paper ballot. They did a manual recount. It's really easy. You can Google it. You can see the people do it. But Texas literally can't, which means the system could be rigged, but we have no way of proving it. And it's hilarious to me because I'm like, we have a few other states. There's Jersey doesn't have one, but that's because it was expensive when they got it, and then they didn't realize they needed it, so then they have to redo all the machines, and they just can't afford it.
Oh no.
Because they all went to digital, going, yeah, we're upgrading, and it's way better than the hanging chads of
Right.
2008. And they're like, yeah, but no one realized we needed a paper copy, and then every tech company in the world said, no, dude, you need to have a paper record.
Right.
Just in case, because otherwise a hacker can jump into your computer and just rig the whole thing. So you need to have a paper record that the person prints out, sees that it has what their vote was, and then can put it somewhere that you can go through and have a different person go through and look at it and go, yep, that's what Joe voted for.
Right.
And it's like, so there's 8 states in the U.S. right now that don't have paper records.
Oh wow.
Jersey's the only Democratic one, the only one that went blue in the last election. The other 7 went red.
Wow.
So all of the other ones, I will cut slack for all of them except for Texas, because Texas is the 3rd largest GDP in the country. They don't get an excuse. The other ones like Alabama, I'm like, look, I get it. It's expensive, and you don't bring in all that much money. That's fine. Fix it when you can. But
yeah.
When it comes to Texas, I'm like, you not fixing it just looks shady.
Yeah.
It just looks like corruption. I'm like, I'm not sure it is. You know what? You can prove it because you can't, because you don't have paper records.
I was actually really happy with the voting system that we had for LA this round.
Impressive.
And I've been volunteering since my job makes it nice to be able to volunteer, because I'm technically a public servant,
sure.
So I can still get my paycheck, and hey, I can take a break from being an engineer for a day, and I can help with the voting system for a day, and that's cool. So that was always a fun experience. But I did do the Chad system once, and that was a night. Actually, sorry, it wasn't the Chad system. It was like a little pen thing.
Yeah,
that
we
pushes
got
in
the
hole.
push pen thing.
The push pen thing, and it was fine. It's just a little bit annoying sometimes. But this was great, the whole scanning thing. And but there's a paper copy, and then the side note was great was having the 10 days. I think we did 10 days of voting.
Mm-hmm.
Through the weekend, or through 2 weekends, I think it was. It started like on a Friday, went through that weekend, and then a whole nother weekend, which is just, it was always ridiculous to me that voting would just be one day, and it's a Tuesday. And it's like, how is that supposed to work for working people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny, now we've come full circle again, because now we're back to like, oh yeah, Georgia actually had 3 weeks.
Whoa, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Wow.
They just took one of those weeks off, though.
They just took one of those weeks off.
Back to that whole reducing hours thing, and they just took one of their weeks off of early voting. They just cut the hours on the weekend vote, the weekend voting, and their early voting got cut down. Their weekend hours got cut down. Wow. They moved the drop boxes inside, so you can only use the drop boxes while they're open. So that if
you come after hours, you can't
drop off your vote.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to go through and argue about needing an ID? I'm like, I'll support you, but like, just trying to not let people vote, that's like kind of
not so good.
Not as good.
Yeah. Wow, this is great. This is a long interview. We had a great time.
It's been fun. How long has it been?
60, 120. Math is hard. 180. We've been with 3 hours and 7 minutes.
You should have cut us off. No one's going to listen to this stuff. I can't ramble. I know I can ramble for 4 hours, but who wants to listen to me ramble for 4 hours?
People are going to listen to it.
Okay, love it. I thank and love all 3 of you. I appreciate you listening to the end.
That's right. Right on. Closing out. Any last words you want to share?
Nope, that's a good ending for it.
That's it.